Chapter 200. Yi Guqin rarely displayed his dual sword technique in front of others. Therefore, when he unleashed this move, it caused many onlookers to be incomparably stunned. Especially some sword cultivators, their eyes were filled with shock. Only sword cultivators understood how much effort was needed to wield the sword with both hands, and it also required a long period of cultivation. However, using both hands like this could only allow a sword cultivator to wield the sword with both hands at most. It was the first time they had seen someone like Yi Guqin, who could perform a spirit-level sword technique with both swords. This completely overturned their understanding. Boom! Yi Guqin's figure was like a lonely swan as he charged towards Xia Yubing with the power of both swords. This sword technique was equivalent to doubling the power of both swords. Xia Yubing also revealed an extremely surprised expression. She had some understanding of Yi Guqin. After all, they were childhood sweethearts. However, she had never seen Yi Guqin practice dual swords. Even if he had extraordinary talent, if he had never cultivated it before, it would be difficult for him to perform a dual sword technique. When did Yi Guqin learn dual swords? Xia Yubing bit her red lips. At this critical moment, she could only take out the white tortoise shell again, turning it into a white shield to block Yi Guqin's sword technique. However, Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows. The Calamity Dust Sword and Meteor Soft Sword's weapon veins were lit up, their power overlapping. At the same time, golden light veins snaked out from his body, sparkling and translucent. "It's the sword vein!" Some cultivators exclaimed when they saw this. Previously, Yi Guqin was able to obtain the title of Sword Master because he had two ultimate moves. The first was naturally his innate ability, the innate sword embryo. The second was the sword vein that could increase the power of sword chi. After that, in the Sword King's secret realm, Yi Guqin's sword vein was destroyed by Gu Xiaoyang. But now Yi Guqin had cultivated the sword vein to perfection. 360 sword rays emitted resplendent golden light, making Yi Guqin look like a god descending. With the amplification of the perfect sword vein, the power of Yi Guqin's dual sword unique skill was stacked again, reaching a terrifying level. The earth split apart with Yi Guqin's sword move. The void exploded and let out a sharp howl. Boom! Yi Guqin's attack landed heavily on the white tortoise shell. The spirit inscriptions on the white tortoise shell emitted the strongest light, as it tried its best to defend against this attack. However, the power of Yi Guqin's killing blow was extremely terrifying. Sword chi filled the sky and surged wildly in all directions. It was impossible to block it completely. Bang! The white tortoise shell was blasted back, ruthlessly smashing into Xia Yubing's delicate body. Xia Yubing's face paled. She actually spat out a mouthful of blood, and her figure continuously retreated. Again, Yi Guqin had a wealth of combat experience, so how could he miss this opportunity? On his Calamity Dust Sword, the power of Azura condensed like blood as he slashed out once again. God-slaying sword technique, Yellow Springs. At the same time, he brandished his Meteorite Soft Sword. The sword light was like a wild python, snaking out and tearing the air apart. The ultimate move of the Golden Snake Swordsmanship, Mysterious Sword Light Snake. Bang! Bang! Xia Yubing's figure retreated again. Even the white tortoise shell was sent flying to the side. Yi Guqin's eyes flickered like the cold stars in the sky, extremely sharp and fierce. His Calamity Dust Sword pierced towards Xia Yubing's chest. Xia Yubing clenched her teeth and used traceless snow steps. In this short period of time, Yi Guqin actually didn't give Xia Yubing any chance to counterattack. This kind of fighting method made Xia Yubing's heart heavy. Poochie. Finally, Xia Yubing's movement allowed her to dodge Yi Guqin's sword attack. The Calamity Dust Sword brushed past her shoulder. Following the sound of cloth tearing, her snow-white shoulder split open. Blood flowed out from the graze. Yi Guqin flipped his hand, wanting to attack again, but he suddenly felt an extreme danger. Retreat. The vigilance in his heart made Yi Guqin's feet touch the ground, and his figure abruptly retreated. It was also at this moment that an ice sword suddenly burst out from the ground, brushing past Yi Guqin's body. It was only half a finger's distance away from his face. What a scheme! Yi Guqin's footsteps stopped, looking at the young girl who was holding her shoulder not far away. At this moment, a tidal wave of uproar resounded in the surroundings. Even some of the people from the 7 great powers opened their eyes wide. They were extremely shocked by the situation before their eyes. This Xia Yubing was actually suppressed by Yi Guqin? Xia Yubing can't be blamed. Yi Guqin's fighting experience is simply terrifying. And that two-handed sword, he can actually use a spirit-grade sword technique's ultimate move at the same time. This is simply unheard of. A few people exclaimed, but there were also some people who supported Xia Yubing. They sneered. What's the rush? Lady Xia hasn't taken out her trump card yet. Have you all forgotten what the greatest opportunity she obtained in the North River Sword King's cave was? Hearing these words, the crowd nodded their heads in understanding. Although it seemed like Xia Yubing was being suppressed and was at a disadvantage, she still hadn't completely used her trump card. Yi Guqin, you're indeed mysterious. Yubing has never seen you use such a technique before. Although a bloody wound had appeared on her snow-white shoulder, Xia Yubing didn't care about it. She stared at Yi Guqin with cold eyes. There's no point in saying more. Xia Yubing, I know what your trump card is. So use it, or else you won't have another chance. Yi Guqin's two-handed sword vibrated as he spoke with a cold tone. Since Yi Guqin is in such a hurry to die, then Yubing will fulfill your wish. Although Xia Yubing's blue robe was dyed with blood, when she calmly took a step forward, a sword intent that caused everyone's expression to change drastically swept out in all directions like a blizzard. Ice sword intent. Xia Yubing took a step forward, and frost spread out from the ground beneath her feet. She didn't really use it, but the aura she emitted caused everyone's heart to tremble. Sword intent was a technique that only 1 in 10,000 sword cultivators could comprehend. In the entire Saint Origin dynasty, there were millions of sword cultivators, but those who could comprehend sword intent might not even be 1 in a million. For example, in this elite gathering, only Xia Yubing and Yuan Mia had comprehended sword intent. Including Yi Guqin, there were only 3 people. Even Morong Ditian, a genius of the sword Dao, hadn't comprehended sword intent. One could imagine how rare it was for geniuses to comprehend sword intent. With this sword intent, Xia Yubing is in an undefeatable position. Xian Tai spoke. He was optimistic about Xia Yubing. Not only him, but the majority of the spectators were also shocked by Xia Yubing's sword intent. Their gazes were filled with envy. Su Jianshi and the others' hearts also clenched. They were worried for Yi Guqin. This ice sword intent isn't something you personally comprehended. It's something you inherited from the North River Sword King. Therefore, you've never understood what sword intent is. Yi Guqin slightly shook his head and spoke in a low voice. Once these words were spoken, many people frowned. They felt that Yi Guqin seemed to be saying sour grapes because he couldn't eat them. This Yi Guqin merely didn't obtain the North River Sword King's inheritance. If the inheritance was placed in front of him, I don't believe that he wouldn't comprehend it. Lu Tianying sneered. Clearly, he was disdainful of Yi Guqin's words. However, Xia Yubing didn't reveal a mocking smile, because she knew that Yi Guqin possessed sword intent. I've already shown my trump card. Then let's fight. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed. His black hair fluttered in the wind. At this moment, he was like a sword god awakening. The meteor flexible sword buzzed and trembled. A similarly profound aura spread out and permeated the surrounding void. This aura is... The eyes of the upper echelons of the 7 major factions shrunk as they stared at Yi Guqin. Many sword cultivators were also stunned. Sensing that terrifying aura, some of their hands even began to tremble. This is sword intent. Chapter 201. Yi Guqin's soft meteorite sword seemed to have turned into a spiritual snake. At the same time, a mysterious sword intent spread out. It was the hard and soft sword intent. Seeing Yi Guqin display sword intent, Xia Yubing frowned slightly, but she wasn't too surprised. After all, in the previous battle, Xia Yubing already knew that Yi Guqin possessed the hard and soft sword intent. However, the several tens of thousands of spectators, as well as the people from the 7 major forces, were all somewhat dumbfounded. Sword intent wasn't a martial art that could be obtained through diligent cultivation. Talent, opportunity, and luck were all indispensable. It was precisely because sword intent was difficult to comprehend that sword cultivators with sword intent were so rare. However, at this moment, the people who were originally mocking Yi Guqin for being sour grapes all seemed to be mute as they stared blankly at Yi Guqin. Even those who weren't sword cultivators could feel the ripples of sword intent. As for Lu Tianying, the sneer on his face didn't completely disappear. At this moment it was frozen in place, appearing rather comical. This young Master Yi is truly unfathomable. Zither Fairy by Yenji and the others were also somewhat speechless. After all, Yi Guqin brought them wave after wave of shock. Originally, everyone thought highly of Xia Yubing, who possessed the ice sword intent, but now that Yi Guqin had also displayed his sword intent, the entire battle became complicated and confusing again. So what if you've comprehended sword intent? Yubing has already comprehended the ice sword intent to the highest level. A cold light seemed to flash in Xia Yubing's ice blue eyes. She once again displayed the traceless snow steps while holding the glacier sword. She swung her sword horizontally, still using the ultimate move of the Styx River sword art, the Ice Phoenix sacred image, but the power was incomparable. Because this time, Xia Yubing didn't use a trace of the ice sword intent, but completely unleashed it. Clang! The Ice Phoenix divine statue formed by the endless ice sword aura was truly like an ancient phoenix descending into the world. It carried a terrifying power as it violently rushed towards Yi Guqin. Wherever it passed, frost filled the sky and the earth froze. Hardness and gentleness, myriad demonic sword shadows. Yi Guqin swung his meteorite flexible sword horizontally. His tool meridian lit up, and at the same time, he activated the phantom, gathering, and light spiritual runes, causing the power of the sword move to become even more powerful and unpredictable. In an instant, countless sword lights like a swarm of snakes leaving their nest, covering the sky and the earth as they rushed towards Yubing. At the same time, everyone was shocked to see that those sword lights were not in a straight line. Instead, they were wriggling like snakes. They came from all directions, and from all angles they attacked fiercely. Clang! 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 Countless sword lights fell on the Ice Phoenix sacred shadow, bursting forth with continuous sounds of collision. However, the Ice Phoenix landed on Yi Guqin's body as if it was a dead tree. The dragon was the the Ice Dragon crystal armor, defensive spiritual runruns defensive. Bangzes however. Even so, Yi Guqin was forced to retreat again, coughing out large mouthfuls of blood. That extremely powerful ice sword aura had even spread into his body, causing it to become somewhat stiff. Xia Yubing obviously wouldn't let go of this opportunity. Her lotus feet moved, and she directly attacked with her sword. At this moment, she was like a fierce sword fairy. Each and every one of her attacks was fatal. With the addition of the ice sword intent, the power of Xia Yubing's ice attribute sword techniques was multiplied. Puff! The glacier sword pierced through Yi Guqin's shoulder. Xia Yubing's mouth curled into a cold smile, and she directly activated her ice true energy, which entered Yi Guqin's body through the glacier sword, wanting to freeze his life force. The heavenly sun profound underworld fire surged out from Yi Guqin's body, enveloping Yi Guqin, and dispelling the coldness in his body. His other hand held the sword and swept towards Xia Yubing's chest. Xia Yubing raised her hand, and ice true energy condensed into an ice sword in the air, blocking Yi Guqin's sword. You won't be able to comprehend the pinnacle of sword intent. Xia Yubing seemed to have victory in her grasp, and her glacier sword shook. With a boom, Yi Guqin's figure was sent flying. His entire shoulder was dripping with blood, but it was instantly frozen by the ice true energy, forming a blood ice cube. Be careful! Su Jianshir's heart fiercely clenched when she saw Yi Guqin injured. It seems that Xia Yubing's sword intent is a level higher. The North River Sword King is an expert of the divine dwelling stage, so his inheritance is naturally complete. Xia Yubing's comprehension of sword intent has almost reached the pinnacle. Although Yi Guqin also has sword intent, how can he be Xia Yubing's opponent? As Yi Guqin's situation deteriorated, several cultivators began to discuss. Yi Guqin, let's end this battle. Xia Yubing held her sword horizontally, and the icy chi from the tip of her sword seemed to be able to freeze the air. Snow drifted down from the sky. Xia Yubing was like a fairy in the snow, but what she brought was death. Hard and soft sword intent, is it that simple? Yi Guchen's qi and blood rumbled as they circulated, gathering at his injured shoulder. The wound there quickly began to heal. This was the benefit of a perfect body. In the face of Xia Yubing's fierce sword, Yi Guchen's meteoric soft sword struck out again, and a mysterious hard and soft sword intent filled the surroundings. Xia Yubing was somewhat surprised to find that her fierce sword move seemed to have been imperceptibly weakened when she approached Yi Guchen. Soft sword. Yi Guchen's meteoric soft sword collided with Xia Yubing's glacier sword. There wasn't an intense collision because the fierce sword qi was completely guided by the meteoric soft sword. At this moment, the meteoric soft sword was like a spirit snake, soft and flexible. Hard sword. Yi Guchen's eyes were extremely sharp. In his other hand, the Calamity Dust sword struck out again, activating the Edge Breaker and Thunder Spirit patterns. Adding on the support of the hard and soft sword intent, it seemed to have a sharpness that could shatter space. Xia Yubing's expression changed, and she took out the white tortoise shell again. Break. With the support of the Edge Breaker and hard sword, the Calamity Dust sword struck the white tortoise shell, and actually pierced it by an inch. Immediately after, small cracks began to spread. Xia Yubing's expression changed. Once cracks appeared on the defensive spirit artifact, its defensive power would plummet. Bang! Yi Guchen stepped out, sending the cracked white tortoiseshell flying. While Xia Yubing's figure quickly retreated, Yi Guchen seized the opportunity, and the Calamity Dust sword in his hand struck out. His figure seemed to have pulled out an afterimage, and an extremely sharp sword light burst out with a loud bang. Shadow Kill Sword Art, Vanishing Shadow. Clang! Xia Yubing held her sword horizontally, and felt an extremely sharp sword qi coming from her sword. This sword art is... Xia Yubing's eyes revealed shock. The moment Yi Guchen displayed the Shadow Kill Swordsmanship, the gray-robed man, who had been standing at the edge of the area and watching the battle, suddenly trembled. As if she had been struck by lightning, her mind went blank, and only Yi Guchen's familiar yet strange sword was left. Impossible. I must have seen wrongly. The gray-robed person muttered in a low voice, her voice trembling. Her mind seemed to have been struck by 100,000 lightning bolts, and her jade-like hands were tightly clenched. Her thin fingernails pierced into her white palm, and blood dripped from between her fingers. But as if the heavens were playing a joke on her, Yi Guchen struck out again, and it was also the Shadow Kill sword art. That familiar sword path was like a nightmare. Every night, it would play countless times in the gray-robed person's mind. Every time she dreamed of it, her heart would bleed. Impossible. The gray-robed person bit her lips until they bled. Only a remnant of her will was supporting her, preventing her from fainting. I want to ask him myself. The gray-robed person's face was as white as paper. Chapter 202. On the stage, Yi Guchen used a spirit-grade sword art, the Shadow Assassination sword art. The Shadow Assassination sword art was not only a sword art, but also a combination of movement techniques. Yi Guchen used the shadow steps, and his figure left behind a series of afterimages. Ordinary martial artists could not catch Yi Guchen's movements at all. This is the sword art of the Bloodthirst Tower. Although Xia Yubing had not joined the Bloodthirst Tower, she had heard of some of their sword arts. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He did not plan to hide anything. Although no assassin from the Bloodthirst Tower had ever participated in an elite meeting, Yi Guchen did not care. He had already obtained the Azura sword intent, so he did not mind exposing his identity. Not only Xia Yubing, but even some of the surrounding martial artists, including the geniuses, narrowed their eyes. They felt that this assassination sword art was very similar to the sword arts of the Bloodthirst Tower. However, they did not dare to be certain. Many of them had only heard of the Bloodthirst Tower's sword art, and had never seen it with their own eyes. At this moment, Yi Guchen pushed the Shadow Assassination sword art to the extreme. The sword edge tore through the air, piercing toward Xia Yubing's face. Xia Yubing blocked with her sword, but she could feel the craftiness of Yi Guchen's sword art. This made Xia Yubing unable to capture Yi Guchen's figure with her sword intent of ice. With a loud clang, The sword edges collided, creating a burst of sparks. Yi Guchen's figure retreated again. Then 1,000 feet of qi brewed in his body. With a stomp of his foot, his speed increased several times. The black robe stuck to his body because of the wind pressure. The Shadow Assassination Sword Art's ultimate move, instant kill. In almost half a breath's time, Yi Guchen's figure appeared as if he had teleported, arriving less than 1 zhang in front of Xia Yubing. The Shadow Assassination Sword Art was a spirit-grade middle-grade sword art. Its ultimate move was naturally powerful. Even Xia Yubing's pupils trembled. She was shocked by Yi Guchen's speed. Seeing Yi Guchen's life-reaping sword edge coming, Xia Yubing also attacked. The glacier sword, accompanied by a monstrous chill, suddenly stabbed out. However, the expected sound of metal colliding did not appear when he pierced the sword. Xia Yubing's sword actually directly passed through Yi Guchen's body. Everyone at the scene was dumbfounded, revealing a look of astonishment. When her sword landed on Yi Guchen's body, it was as if it had landed on empty air. There was no sound at all, not even a drop of blood. This is the Bloodthirsty Tower's sword technique. Suddenly, a life and death chamber expert watching the battle spoke. He had once escaped from a blood-listening tower's golden-masked assassin. And the swordsmanship used by the gold-masked assassin was exactly the same as the one used by Yi Guchen. Bloodthirst Tower. Didn't they say that the Bloodthirst Tower's sword techniques are not allowed to be passed on to outsiders? How did Yi Guchen obtain the Bloodthirst Tower's sword techniques? There are only a few famous geniuses in the Bloodthirst Tower. The most famous one in recent times is a genius named Sword Demon. A warrior murmured, and then his face suddenly froze. For a moment, a thought flashed through everyone's mind. At the same time, a wisp of astonishment climbed onto their faces. Sword sect, Sword Demon, could it be? Many warriors glanced at each other. The shock in their hearts could no longer be described with words. Not only had Yi Guchen transformed into Dugu Wubai, but he had also once been Bloodthirst Tower's Sword Demon. This conclusion was like a bomb falling into the sea, setting off monstrous waves. Just Dugu Wubai's identity alone was enough to shock everyone. Now they had come to the conclusion that Sword Sect was Sword Demon. Although Sword Demon's reputation was not as resounding as Dugu Wubai's, he was still a peerless assassin whose name was known throughout the Bloodthirst Tower. Brother Yi, how many more secrets do you have that you haven't revealed? Chu Qingqi was already beyond shocked, unable to say anything. The hearts of the people from the 7 major factions had even become somewhat numb. Yi Guchen's endless identities and methods were like an iron hammer, heavily smashing everyone's hearts again and again. However, only the gray-robed man's body trembled even more violently amidst the shocking uproar, as if he was enduring something. In the field, when Xia Yubing pierced through Yi Guchen's body like air, an extreme sense of danger suddenly surged in her heart. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, Xia Yubing pushed her ice sword intent to the extreme. A sword qi that seemed to be able to freeze people's minds spread out from her body. The sound of something freezing could be heard. It was the ice sword qi that had blocked the attack of a sword. At this moment, Yi Guchen's figure was shockingly behind Xia Yubing. His calamity dust sword was no more than 3 inches away from the back of Xia Yubing's head. Yi Guchen's wrist shook, urging the heavenly sun profound underworld fire. At the same time, sword qi exploded, wanting to pierce through Xia Yubing's head. Xia Yubing's head suddenly tilted. With a bang, the calamity dust sword pierced through the ice sword qi, brushing past the side of Xia Yubing's head, cutting off a few strands of ice blue hair that fluttered in the wind. What a pity! Yi Guchen sighed inwardly. The ultimate killing move of the Shadow Assassination Sword Art was not only powerful, but also an extreme assassination move. It was able to create an afterimage to confuse the enemy at the same time as the sword strike, and then quietly circle behind the enemy to deliver a fatal blow. However, Xia Yubing's cultivation was powerful, and she was alert. Her ice sword intent exploded, causing Yi Guchen's sword to miss. If such an assassination sword technique did not succeed the first time, it would be very difficult to confuse Xia Yubing a second time. Yi Guchen, you've really angered Yubing. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes were extremely cold. Just now, If not for her quick mind and her ice sword intent, she might have really been pierced through by Yi Guqin's sword. That kind of life and death crisis made Xia Yubing's heart surge with anger. In her eyes, Yi Guqin, who was destined to be stepped on by her, had actually threatened her life. Xia Yubing could not accept this. Xia Yubing, what is your trump card? Show it. Yi Guqin coldly stared at Xia Yubing. Although Xia Yubing had already activated her ice sword intent, Yi Guqin still felt that Xia Yubing seemed to be hiding something. Xia Yubing's shrewdness made Yi Guqin have no choice but to be cautious. What? Could it be that Xia Yubing still has a trump card that she hasn't used yet? Many people were shocked when they heard Yi Guqin's words. In their eyes, Xia Yubing, who had completely activated her ice sword intent, was already extremely powerful. Could it be that she still had not used her full strength? Ha! Ha ha! Xia Yubing laughed. Her laughter carried disdain. She looked at Yi Guqin and said with a deep gaze, Yi Guqin, you have indeed exceeded Yubing's expectations. Yubing actually also knows that you should still be hiding something. However, it doesn't matter. Next, no matter what trump card you use, even if it's the hard and soft sword intent, you will not be able to contend against me. Xia Yubing's words carried extreme confidence, as if victory was already in her hands. Oh. Yi Guqin waited with rapt attention. This is what Yubing obtained when she entered the Sword King Mystery Realm for the second time. Xia Yubing flipped her hand and put away the glacier sword. Then she took out another sword. The moment this sword appeared, its aura was astonishing. The coldness it emitted caused everyone to tremble. This is a divine weapon with mystical patterns. Someone cried out in disbelief. Chapter 203. Mystical rune divine weapons were rarer and more powerful than spirit rune divine weapons. Spirit runes resonated with each other, forming a formation to amplify the weapon's power. Of course, mystical rune divine weapons were not something that could be forged by ordinary blacksmiths. At the very least, only blacksmiths above 5 stars had the ability to forge them. Moreover, the success rate was not high. The mystical rune divine weapon that Xia Yubing took out was dark blue in color. The sword's body was winding like a dragon's body, emitting a deep chilling intent. The sword's hilt seemed to be lined with dragon scales. Along with the infusion of true qi, many spirit runes appeared on the sword's body, faintly emitting a frightening aura. This Frosthorn Dragon Sword was the sword that North River Sword King Chu Donglu used when he became a Sword King. Using it to kill you is like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Xia Yubing shook her head slightly, seemingly disdainful. Chu Donglio's Sword King divine weapon. Many people stared at it in shock. How powerful was the sword of a Sword King? Xia Yubing's glacier sword was merely the sword that Chu Donglu used when he was young. Only when Xia Yubing entered the Sword King's secret realm for the second time did she have the ability to unseal this mystical rune divine weapon. Prince Yuani relied on the heavenly sacred 5 elements wheel to become a prodigy. When Murong Ditian took out the Mara sword, his battle prowess multiplied. And now, when Xia Yubing, who was already incomparably powerful, took out her mystical rune divine weapon, how terrifying would her battle prowess be? Many martial artists held their breaths. Xia Yubing, who had activated her sword intent to the extreme, in addition to the Frosthorn Dragon Sword, emitted a powerful aura that almost suffocated them. Swords are indeed important to sword cultivators. However, this is Chu Donglio's sword, not yours. Feeling the sharp aura emitted from Xia Yubing's body, Yi Guqin also frowned. However, he still did not show any fear and faced it seriously. I'll let you experience what a Sword King divine weapon is. Xia Yubing slowly stepped out with the Frosthorn Dragon sword in her hand. Her ice blue hair fluttered. With every step she took, her aura increased by a bit. In addition to the ice sword intent that spread in all directions, the current Xia Yubing was like an ice goddess descending to the mortal world, sending down tribulation. She struck out with her sword again. It was still the glacier sword art from before, but the power was incomparable. An endless stream of icy air swept towards Yi Guqin, as if the glaciers in the heavenly river were reversing. Even the outer true energy barrier was suffused with traces of frost. Yi Guqin frowned as he sensed a terrifying aura. This was the power of the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword. God-slaying sword technique. Yellow Springs. Yi Guqin's 1,000 feet wide golden chi sea surged like waves as the Azura power rushed towards the Calamity Dust Sword. The Calamity Dust Sword, which was originally covered in natural lightning patterns, now seemed to be condensed from blood. It carried a terrifying killing intent. He slashed out with his sword, causing a river of blood to overturn the heavens. That killing intent shook one's mind. Bang! It was as if a destructive explosion had erupted. Boundless sword chi rushed into the sky and spread out in all directions. Cracks appeared on the ground. Cold currents swept through the air, and a bloody light pierced through the sky. However, when everyone focused their gazes, they were shocked to discover that the cold sword chi had directly torn apart the blood river. The remaining sword chi surged violently towards Yi Guqin. Seeing this, Yi Guqin activated the heavenly sun mystic underworld fire in his body. Endless strange flames swept out, wanting to resist Xia Yubing's move. However, Xia Yubing's eyes revealed a cold glint. The corner of her mouth curved into a mocking smile. She activated the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword again. Spirit patterns flickered on the sword's body. Like formation patterns, they meandered along the sword's body. Boom! The sword that was already powerful to begin with, under the support of the divine weapon with mystical patterns, erupted with extreme power. Cough. Yi Guqin coughed out blood from the corner of his mouth. His figure flew backwards, and the Frozen Horn Dragon crystal armor emitted cracking sounds. Even if it was a spirit-grade defensive divine weapon, it was still somewhat unable to withstand the sword chi of a divine weapon with mystical patterns. In addition, the Frozen Horn Dragon crystal armor had not been fully repaired, so cracks spread out like a spider web. Dong! 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 Yi Guqin's feet stepped on the ground, creating a deep pit with each step. That was because he was under extreme pressure from the sword chi. Even his bones were emitting cracking sounds. It was hard to imagine that Yi Guqin, who had a perfect physical body and the power of dragons and elephants, was still completely suppressed by Xia Yubing. The Frozen Horn Dragon Sword and the Ice Sword Intent, as well as the compatibility of their attributes, erupted with a power that shocked everyone. Seeing Yi Guqin being heavily injured by a single sword strike, many cultivators sucked in a breath of cold air. Before, Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin had won and lost, going back and forth. But now, after Xia Yubing took out the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword, the increase in her battle strength had almost completely crushed Yi Guqin. Clang! 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 How could Xia Yubing let go of such an advantage? Her figure fluttered like a fairy, like an ice crane. The Frozen Horn Dragon Sword in her hand swept towards Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin blocked with his sword. With a clang, the Calamity Dust Sword faintly emitted cracking sounds. Not good. Hearing this sound, Su Jinsher's heart was in her throat. Her jade-like hands tightly grasped her skirt, and her charming eyes revealed a nervous expression. Bang! After one strike, Yi Guqin's figure was once again pushed back, his blood and chi churning endlessly. Yi Guqin, it's over, Xia Yubing coldly shouted. The surrounding cold air seemed to be like rivers flowing into the sea, converging towards the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword. On the crystal-like body of the dark blue sword, there seemed to be an illusory image of a hornless dragon. Of course, this phantom wasn't real. It was formed by the power of many spiritual marks stacked together. Shenluo Heavenly Sword. Xia Yubing's sword swept out, and the sword chi of the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword violently erupted. This sword move wasn't of the ice attribute, but the fluctuations were still shocking. Could it be a king-grade sword art? Many people cried out in alarm, because the power of Xia Yubing's sword was earth-shattering. No, there are some fluctuations of a king-grade sword art, but it's not complete. The experts of the 7 great powers had high standards, and spoke at this moment. Facing this terrifying sword attack, Yi Guqin also had some understanding. This must be the incomplete king-grade sword art that Xia Yubing comprehended in the venerable cave-dwelling sword cavern. Because of the Enlightenment Leaf support, in addition to the sword cavern's mysteries, Xia Yubing was able to quickly display this kind of supreme technique. Although she couldn't completely display the power of this sword move, she could still display its initial power. An incomplete king-grade sword art? Yi Guchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Facing this heaven-shaking sword, Yi Guchen's gaze sharpened. He swung the calamity dust sword again, and a shocking bloodthirsty aura burst out with a loud bang. At this moment, Yi Guchen fully activated the Azura power in his body and poured it into the calamity dust sword. What he held in his hand was a sword that seemed to be completely condensed from blood. What a terrifying power! If Xia Yubing's sword was said to be frightening, then Yi Guchen's sword was said to be hair-raising. It was as if they were facing an Azura-killing god. God-slaying sword art. Yi Guchen's voice was hoarse, and the Azura power in his body converged into a sword attack, exploding out with a loud bang. 3 paths. God-slaying sword art's fourth move, 3 paths. Boom. A gust of extremely bitter killing intent suddenly surged into the 9 heavens. At this moment, the battlefield was like the Yellow Springs. The incomparably huge sword energy blood river directly split into 3, surrounding Xia Yubing and attacking. Its power was 3 times that of the third move, Yellow Springs. Xia Yubing frowned. She also felt a type of terrifying killing power. Her ice sword intent was also activated, increasing the power of this sword strike. Boom. An indescribable explosion rang out. It was as if a star from outer space had exploded. Chaotic sword chi swept out in all directions like raging waves. Numerous cracks appeared on the ground. The sky prides in the distance were blasted back. They had all suffered quite a bit of damage. In the midst of this impact, everyone heard a crisp cracking sound. That was the sound of something breaking. Impossible. Su Jianshir's face was as white as a sheet. In the battlefield, the smoke and dust scattered. Everyone looked over and sucked in a breath of cold air. Xia Yubing's ice hornless dragon sword collided with Yi Guchen's calamity dust sword. Spiderweb-like cracks spread across the calamity dust sword. Break! Xia Yubing shouted, and the calamity dust sword exploded. Chapter 204. Bang! It was accompanied by a crisp cracking sound. The calamity dust sword that had accompanied Yi Guchen for a long time exploded into countless metal fragments at this moment. Yi Guchen's expression froze. He didn't panic at all. With a flick of his wrist, he blocked the sharp fragments with his meteor soft sword. He coughed out blood as his ribs cracked. At the same time, sword chi entered his body, causing him to be injured again. Xia Yubing's chest felt stuffy as many wounds appeared on her arm. She retreated with a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Yi Guchen's 3 paths had also injured her. However, by relying on the advantage of her divine weapon, Xia Yubing still had the advantage in this attack. Xia Yubing once again rushed towards Yi Guchen and slashed down with her sword. Clearly, she wanted to break Yi Guchen's meteor soft sword. Xia Yubing was confident in the power of her divine weapon. Seeing Xia Yubing's actions, everyone sighed inwardly. Su Jianshir clenched her teeth and said angrily, "What kind of ability is relying on a divine weapon?" Many sword cultivators were also silently criticizing Xia Yubing. However, most of them didn't say anything. A divine weapon was also a part of one's strength. Since Xia Yubing had inherited all of the North River Sword King's inheritance, her divine weapon was naturally a part of her strength. However, contrary to Xia Yubing's expectations, her sword didn't break the meteor soft sword as she had imagined. When the two swords clashed, dazzling sparks flew. Yi Guchen's blood-stained lips curled into a faint smile. Although his meteor soft sword was only a high-grade divine weapon, it was an elite item that had been refined 100,000 times. In addition, it was made of golden ring heavenly silk steel. Such a flexible metal couldn't be easily broken. Yi Guchen's hard and soft sword intent was unleashed. The meteor soft sword instantly softened as it clashed with the glacial hornless dragon sword. This displayed Yi Guchen's extraordinary battle experience. He skillfully used the hard and soft sword intent. He used the soft sword to dissolve the glacial hornless dragon sword's power. He took the opportunity to counterattack with his steel sword. Of course, Xia Yubing wasn't someone easy to deal with. Her ice sword intent continued to spread, supporting the frozen horn dragon sword. Sword of the Void 100 Waves. Yi Guchen shook his sword once again. Waves of void sword waves spread out, shaking towards Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing once again took out the white tortoise shell. Although it was filled with cracks, it still possessed a powerful defensive power. However, contrary to Xia Yubing's expectations, more than half of the void sword wave actually passed through the white tortoise shell, ruthlessly smashing into her delicate body. Cough! Xia Yubing's expression changed as her beautiful face turned pale. She hurriedly used her true qi to suppress the vibrations in her body. That terrifying vibrational force almost instantly caused Xia Yubing to suffer quite a bit of injury. Seeing this, Yi Guqian's eyes glinted like swords. He rushed forward, and his sword vibrated even more violently. His sword wave seemed to resonate with the void, and waves of translucent sword waves overlapped with each other. That fluctuation even far surpassed the might of the 100-fold wave. Sword of the void, 1,000 waves. A buzzing sound exploded in the void, as if a divine drum had been beaten. The terrifying sword wave swept towards Xia Yubing, wave after wave, like a collapsing dam. No less than 1,000 waves of sword wave. The Sword of the Void was the spirit-level sword technique of the Limitless Sword sect. Therefore, the people who were the most shocked were none other than the people from the Limitless Sword sect. Especially Xianing, who had lost the Void Sword wave to Yi Guqian. Even now, he still hadn't reached great success in the Sword of the Void. How is this possible? How long has it been since I lost the Sword of the Void to him? How could he have reached great success in the spirit-level sword technique so quickly? Xianing couldn't believe Yi Guqian. This child's comprehension of sword techniques can be called monstrous. Even Xiantai couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. They naturally didn't know that Yi Guqian already had a foundation, adding his own talent, the seed of the sword heart, and the leaf of enlightenment. With all these factors added together, Yi Guqian was able to master several spirit-level sword techniques in the sword cavern of the Venerable Realm, and reach great success in comprehending them. Xia Yubing's expression was also grave as she faced Yi Guqian's ultimate move. She stepped on the ground, and icy sword qi spread out, blocking the void sword wave. At the same time, she once again activated the vast might of the icy hornless dragon sword. On the body of the sword, spiritual patterns lit up, connecting into one. This was a divine weapon with spiritual patterns. It wasn't like a divine weapon with spiritual patterns, which only had a few spiritual patterns. Xia Yubing shouted. Her icy blue hair fluttered in the wind. She seemed to have returned to being simple. She attacked with an extremely simple sword, but it contained boundless might. Everywhere it passed, the earth turned into frost, and the void froze. Bang! Many ripples erupted in the area. Waves of void sword waves surged in all directions, and a chill surged. Xia Yubing and Yi Guqian were entangled in a battle. With the battle having reached such a stage, there was nothing much to say. The only thing that could be done was to risk their lives, to exchange injuries for injuries. Xia Yubing pointed her sword at Yi Guqian. Yi Guqian moved to the side, but his shoulder was struck by the icy hornless dragon sword. Although he had the dragon armor of ice and fire protecting him, it was already full of cracks. It wasn't far from being scrapped. However, at the same time that Yi Guqian was injured, he also erupted with void sword wave, sweeping it towards Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's true qi exploded, but she was still injured. The two retreated, coughing up blood at the same time. However, because of the icy hornless dragon sword, Yi Guqian's injuries were more serious. However, what made Xia Yubing's expression turn gloomy was that although Yi Guqian's injuries were more serious than hers, his blood was surging, and his true qi was surging. His wounds were able to quickly stop bleeding. Therefore, from the looks of it, it was Xia Yubing who was at a disadvantage. Damn it! Why is this Yi Guqian's physical body so powerful? His recovery ability is also so strong. Xia Yubing's beautiful eyes sank. She discovered that the true qi in her body was showing signs of not being enough. Although Xia Yubing was a proud daughter of heaven, and the scope of her qi far exceeded that of ordinary geniuses, it was still impossible for her to compare with Yi Guqian's 1,000 zhang qi. In addition, Xia Yubing had used the heavenly frost-flowing snow sword formation before, as well as the sword intent, which consumed a lot of true qi. The bloody battle had continued for such a long time, and even Xia Yubing felt somewhat exhausted. As if seeing Xia Yubing showing signs of not being able to endure, Yi Guchen's attacks became even fiercer. His sword was like a graceful swan, and his sword qi swept out in all directions. Xia Yubing's true qi seems to be somewhat lacking. After fighting for such a long time, why is Yi Guchen still full of vigor, and his true qi is so vast? Even if he had a 20 zhang qi si before, his true qi shouldn't be this vigorous. Many people were shocked and at the same time puzzled. The people of the 7 major powers looked at Yi Guchen, as if they were looking at a rare animal. Yi Guchen's powerful physical body and vigorous true qi made them tremble in fear. The spectators started whispering, and all of them were discussing. However, it was obvious that many people saw that Xia Yubing's true qi was lacking, so some people gradually thought more highly of Yi Guchen. No, I can't lose. I, Xia Yubing, am a proud daughter of heaven. I definitely can't lose this battle. Xia Yubing waved her sword, and her sword aura was extremely powerful. However, although Yi Guchen's body was covered in wounds, and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth, his true qi was still surging, and his blood was flowing like a tide. This made Xia Yubing's heart shrouded in a haze. With her pride, she definitely couldn't lose this battle. Moreover, Xia Yubing knew that if she lost, it would be equivalent to death. After another sword exchange, Xia Yubing's figure stabilized. She looked at Yi Guchen, and her ice-blue eyes surged with an indescribable emotion. Why, Yi Guchen? Why is it that in front of Yubing, you are always blocking Yi Guchen's figure? Xia Yubing tightly gripped the frozen nightmare dragon sword, and her knuckles turned white from the force. No matter if it was in the past or now, I'm not blocking in front of you. It's you who can only stand behind me. Yi Guchen's tone was indifferent. The condition of his body wasn't very good either. Even if his perfect physical body had a stronger recovery ability, it couldn't completely heal all his injuries. Therefore, Yi Guchen's injuries were still gradually worsening. However, at this moment, Yi Guchen was waiting with rapt attention, and at the same time frowning. The frozen nightmare dragon sword and ice sword intent had already been displayed. Yi Guchen didn't understand how Xia Yubing could still fight. Is that so? Xia Yubing laughed, and an extreme hatred surged in her ice-blue eyes. Since that's the case, then let me Yubing personally get rid of you. Xia Yubing's origin ring flashed, and a deep blue jade bottle appeared. Xia Yubing shattered the jade bottle, and a sparkling and translucent ice-blue pill that emitted an endless chill appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Yi Guchen, you forced me to do this. In the following battle, if you can withstand it, I, Xia Yubing, will stretch out my neck for you to kill. Xia Yubing's ice-blue hair fluttered in the wind. Her blood-stained red lips opened slightly, and she swallowed the pill, as if a goddess had entered a demonic state. Chapter 205. Xia Yubing's move was out of everyone's expectations. Although the martial practitioners didn't know what the ice blue pill was used for, since Xia Yubing had swallowed it, it must have some effect. Many people's expressions changed. Although the Elite Association didn't have the rule of not swallowing pills in battle, since it was a decisive battle, taking the initiative to swallow a pill would obviously be looked down upon by some people. Even the martial practitioners who supported Xia Yubing didn't clamor anymore. There was a kind of speechless awkwardness. However, Xia Yubing knew that she couldn't lose. Therefore, even if her reputation would be affected, she had to do it. This Ice Soul Divine Pill is another thing I obtained apart from the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword. I originally didn't plan to swallow it, but it's all because of you. Xia Yubing looked at Yi Guchen, seemingly filled with endless hatred. With my Xia Yubing's talent, I could have broken through to the Divine Soul Realm on my own. I could have completely comprehended the Ice Sword intent, and turned it into Sword Dao on my own. But now, in order to kill you, I can only swallow the Ice Soul Divine Pill and forcefully advance. Doing this will harm my Dao foundation, and may even harm my future cultivation. It's all because of you, Yi Guchen. Therefore you must die. Xia Yubing's long blue hair fluttered in the wind. Her peerless face seemed to have been possessed by a devil. After swallowing the Ice Soul Divine Pill, her aura rose uncontrollably. A terrifying chill that was enough to freeze the surroundings gushed out from her delicate body. Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. He naturally couldn't watch Xia Yubing swallow the pill and break through. Kill. Yi Guchen's golden qi in his dantian was pushed to the limit. The meteorite soft sword pierced out. God-slaying sword technique, 3 paths. 3 incomparably huge rivers of blood of sword qi rushed out with Yi Guchen's sword, attacking Xia Yubing. It's too late. Xia Yubing's eyes were cold. At this moment, divine light circulated on her skin. A powerful aura spread out with her body as the center, forming a storm that spread in all directions. Yi Guchen's sharp sword aura was completely blocked. Xia Yubing's hair fluttered in the wind. Her eyes shone with divine light, as if a goddess was about to ascend. Her half-step divine soul aura also rose once more. All of the spectators were stupefied. Xia Yubing's sudden change was outside of their expectations. Even the people of the 7 great factions narrowed their eyes and wore serious expressions. Xia Yubing's aura rapidly charged towards the divine soul realm. At the same time, an even more terrifying fluctuation was brewing within Xia Yubing's body. That fluctuation. At the edge of the battlefield, Yuan Mia frowned. Only those who possess sword intent would be able to sense the changes in Xia Yubing's sword intent. Could it be? Not only Yuan Mia, even Yi Guchen, who was at the center of the battlefield, naturally sensed Xia Yubing's changes. Regardless of whether it was the change in the realm, or the change in the fluctuation of the sword essence, the effects of the Ice Soul Divine Pill surprised even Yi Guchen. Clearly, the Ice Soul Divine Pill was the same as the Frozen Horn Dragon Sword. They were both the most precious treasures of the Sword King Chu Donglio's inheritance. At this moment, Xia Yubing had consumed the Ice Soul Divine Pill and erupted with a powerful aura. Even Yi Guchen felt that it was a little troublesome. Although she consumed the pill, victory and defeat will be decided once Xia Yubing breaks through. Regardless of whether it was the 7 great factions or the tens of thousands of cultivators, they all had the same thought. The aura and pressure emitted by Xia Yubing made a few Divine Soul Realm experts frown as they felt a faint sense of threat. Since she consumed the pill, then, Yi Guchen muttered coldly. He had never underestimated Xia Yubing. At this moment, Xia Yubing's breakthrough with the help of the Ice Soul Divine Pill made him feel an enormous pressure. Therefore, Yi Guchen also had to have a method to contend against her. As if he had made a decision, Yi Guchen flipped his wrist and took out a simple golden pill with the carvings of the 5 divine beasts. It was the 5-colored golden pill that Yi Guchen had obtained from the barbarian race expert in the bottomless devil abyss. Although Yi Guchen was still unsure of the effects of the 5-colored golden pill, the faint refining power was something that Yi Guchen needed. Currently, his tendon-changing scripture and marrow-cleansing scripture had reached large success. He was just a step away from merging them and cultivating the indestructible diamond body. Right now, Xia Yubing's cultivation was rising steadily. Her sword essence was also undergoing a terrifying change. If Yi Guchen was still hesitating, he might really fall into a great crisis. After making up his mind, Yi Guchen swallowed the 5-colored golden elixir. Seeing that Yi Guchen had also swallowed an elixir, the spectators had a strange look on their faces. Was this a competition to see who had more pills? Xia Yubing, who was in the midst of breaking through, also saw Yi Guchen's actions. Her expression immediately darkened. However, she was confident that Yi Guchen's pill was definitely inferior to her Ice Soul Divine Pill. The originally dust-filled battlefield instantly fell into a short period of deathly silence. However, everyone knew that this was the sign of a storm. Both Xia Yubing and Yi Guchen had taken medicinal pills. Whoever broke through first would be able to seize the initiative and even win. When the 5-colored golden pill entered his body, Yi Guchen knew that it was definitely not just a pill. This was because the 5-colored golden pill did not dissolve at all. Instead, it directly entered Yi Guchen's dantian. At the same time, a powerful suction force surged out from the 5-colored golden pill and began to devour Yi Guchen's qi and blood. What? Yi Guchen was taken aback by this sudden turn of events. Other pills increased one's strength, but this 5-colored golden pill was madly devouring Yi Guchen's qi and blood. Fortunately, Yi Guchen had a perfect body, and he had mastered 2 body tempering techniques. Only then could he provide such exuberant qi and blood. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they would probably be sucked dry in an instant. Although he did not know what this 5-colored divine beast golden pill was used for, Yi Guchen felt that it was definitely not simple. He activated the qi and blood in his body and poured it into the 5-colored golden pill. In front of Yi Guchen, Xia Yubing's figure was hidden within the ice storm. However, the ripples she emitted were rising in intensity. Even people as strong as Yuan Mia, Shen Miao, and the others frowned when they felt Xia Yubing's aura. This suffocating atmosphere lasted for about a quarter of an hour. Rumble. A low rumble came from within the ice storm, as if true qi was exploding and spirit power was shaking. Xia Yubing is about to succeed. She's about to break through to the divine soul realm. Many people cried out in surprise, widening their eyes to see this scene clearly. The gap between half-step divine soul realm and divine soul realm was huge. Boom. Another explosion sounded, and the surging true qi storm spread in all directions. Wind and snow filled the sky, and true qi surged. The blue-haired Xia Yubing was like a goddess breaking out of a cocoon, and her aura was terrifying. Divine soul realm. Not only that, Xia Yubing slowly walked forward. Every single step that landed on the ground gave off a peculiar aura that pervaded the air. She slowly raised her hand, and then slowly pressed it down. Boom. A terrifying ice domain spread out, and instantly enveloped the entire battlefield covered in true qi. Inside the ice domain, endless frost and snow soared, making Xia Yubing look like an ice goddess. Ice sword Dao, I've broken through. Divine soul realm, I've broken through. Yi Guchen, what are you going to use to fight me? Chapter 206. Xia Yubing's voice was as cold as water, as if she was speaking to an ice goddess. The surrounding space was filled with coldness. Sword qi was like frost, covering the entire area. Not to mention Yi Guchen, who was at the center. Even the geniuses who had retreated to the periphery felt a bone-chilling coldness. That coldness was like the tip of a sword pressing against their hearts. He has indeed made a breakthrough. Yuan Mia's deathly still eyes began to ripple. As someone who also possessed sword intent, he knew what realm Xia Yubing had reached. Ice sword Dao. As Xia Yubing's voice rang out, everyone's faces froze. Numerous gazes seemed to have been nailed onto Xia Yubing's body, unable to leave at all. Even the higher-ups of the 7 major powers, such as Xian Taiyi and the others, couldn't remain calm. Sword Dao. It really is the sword Dao. Xia Yubing actually used a pill to break through the bottleneck of the sword Dao. The charming woman from the consonant's divine palace's higher-ups muttered in surprise. Sword intent, sword Dao. The difference of a single word was like the difference between heaven and earth. Sword intent was the foundation of the sword Dao, the initial comprehension. When sword intent transformed into sword Dao, it would give birth to all sorts of unimaginable sword Dao techniques, and it could even form a sword Dao domain. It was just like the ice domain that Xia Yubing was emitting. Within this domain, Xia Yubing's abilities would expand infinitely, and the power of her sword moves would also multiply. Although she had only broken through to the ice sword Dao, the domain she emitted wasn't weak. Xia Yubing is truly a genius. Sword Dao, it actually transformed into sword Dao. What an amazing talent. There were people from the 7 major powers who praised her. Many cultivators who supported Xia Yubing cheered again. Their faces flushed red from excitement. Using a pill to break through the sword Dao isn't stable, Feng Manlu muttered, shaking his head slightly. On the stage, the entire area of the true energy barrier was covered by Xia Yubing's ice domain. Although it was only in the initial stages, its power made many geniuses feel shocked and powerless. Xia Yubing moved gracefully like a goddess, looking down at Yi Guchen, who still hadn't changed much. Looks like Yubing has won this time. Xia Yubing once again took out her frost-hornless dragon sword. At the same time, a powerful aura was released. Although this aura wasn't particularly stable, it did indeed belong to a divine soul realm expert. Yi Guchen's current situation was not very good, because he found that the 5-colored golden core in his body was very greedy. Even after devouring so much blood and qi, there was still no reaction. On the contrary, Yi Guchen's body was gradually weakening due to the excessive amount of qi and blood he had devoured. Could it be that I was wrong? Yi Guchen's lips began to turn pale. There was no color in them. His aura was declining. Heh. Looks like your medicinal pill didn't display the effect it should have. Even the heavens are standing on Yubing's side. Xia Yubing coldly laughed. Without saying anything more, she directly attacked. As the frost hornless dragon sword was swung out, the surrounding ice domain began to vibrate. Countless frosty sword chi swirled around like tornadoes. Yi Guchen used his wave-like subtle steps, but he felt as if he had stepped into a swamp. His speed was twice as slow as before. This was the suppression of Yi Guchen's ice domain. Pung. And within the ice domain, the power of Xia Yubing's sword techniques was greatly increased. She only casually swung her sword, and the frosty sword chi was like a huge snowy dragon that roared and howled, breaking through Yi Guchen's defense. With a puchi, he coughed up blood and flew backwards. The dragon armor of ice and fire was unable to withstand such power, and was on the verge of shattering. Die. Xia Yubing's eyes were cold. She had waited for this moment for too long. Yi Guchen used the fourth style of the god-slaying sword technique again, 3 paths. 3 streams of yellow springs blood rivers of sword chi erupted, but they were once again weakened by the ice domain. Clang. The frost hornless dragon sword repelled the meteor soft sword, and then under everyone's shocked gazes, it touched Yi Guchen's dragon armor of ice and fire. Break. Xia Yubing coldly rebuked. Pung. The dragon armor of ice and fire exploded into countless fragments. Yi Guchen spat out a large mouthful of blood. His body flew back dozens of feet like a kite with its string cut. Silly boy. Su Jianshir's face turned pale. She wanted to charge out, but she was desperately held back by Zither Fairy and by Yenji. Now that Xia Yubing had broken through with the help of pills, she was the strongest among the prodigies. With the ice domain activated, even Shinta Miao and Yuan Miao were no match for her. At this moment, Xia Yubing was invincible among the prodigies here. Yi Guchen die. Xia Yubing said coldly. Her tone carried a trace of relief and a trace of pleasure. With her mindset, she naturally wouldn't give Yi Guchen a chance to catch his breath. She stabbed her sword at Yi Guchen, who was flying backwards. Yi Guchen's mouth and chin were covered in blood. He once again blocked with the meteor soft sword. However, at this critical moment, a cold light suddenly stabbed at Yi Guchen's back from the side. That cold light was actually the glacier sword. Everyone cried out in alarm. Su Jianshir's delicate body was trembling. Xia Yubing was extremely scheming. After breaking through to the divine soul realm, she quietly took out the glacier sword, using the storm of icy sword energy to cover it. At the most critical moment, she borrowed the power of her soul to assassinate Yi Guchen, wanting to give him a fatal blow. Yi Guchen, who had blocked the frost hornless dragon sword with his meteor soft sword, was powerless to block the glacier sword. It's over. Yi Guchen is going to die. Many people shook their heads and sighed. However, Xia Yubing was stunned. She saw that the youth who blocked her sword didn't have the slightest bit of fear on his face. Instead, he was incomparably calm. What other tricks do you have? Xia Yubing couldn't think of any way Yi Guchen could block this sure-kill attack. Rumble. A faint rumbling sound resounded in all directions. It was as if thunder was rolling. What's going on? Is there thunder? Many cultivators were astonished. They looked up at the sky. No, it's coming from Yi Guchen. Some cultivators were shocked as they looked at the battle between life and death. Clang. The glacier sword stabbed at Yi Guchen's back with a sharp and cold sword energy. However, the expected attack didn't appear. At this moment, Yi Guchen's body was trembling like thunder. He was like a volcano that was about to erupt. Indestructible Vajrabody break. In the next moment, Yi Guchen's body emitted boundless golden light. Countless golden scriptures were emitted, as if ancient Buddhas were chanting. Golden light surged on Yi Guchen's body. The body metamorphosed scripture and marrow cleansing scripture had completely merged together. At the most critical moment, the 5-colored golden core in his dantian had finally started to feed back. Endless blood chi and refining power spread out, helping Yi Guchen break through to the indestructible Vajrabody. Kacha. Under everyone's shocked gazes, The glacier sword that was stabbing at Yi Guqin exploded into a ball of ice crystals. Chapter 207. The minds of all the spectating martial artists went blank for a moment. It was as if their thoughts had stopped in that instant. Not only did he block the assassination of a divine weapon with spirit runes with his corporeal body, he even shattered it. If anyone else said this to them, they would definitely not believe it and would laugh their heads off. But now this ridiculous scene was truly displayed in front of their eyes. The shattered glacier sword scattered in all directions, and Xia Yubing's pupils suddenly contracted. How could Xia Yubing miscalculated? No, it should be said that she didn't miscalculate. The success rate of this killing move was indeed 100%. It was just that Yi Guqin's performance far exceeded that of an ordinary person. At this moment, Yi Guqin's body was overflowing with golden light, and the surrounding space seemed to be imprinted with golden runes. Flowers fell from the sky, and golden lotuses sprouted from the ground. It was as if an ancient Buddha was chanting in the void. Unbreakable Vajrabody was a realm that only one of the top 10 experts of the martial world, first ancestor Bodhidharma, had reached. Now Yi Guqin had also reached it. At this moment, Yi Guqin felt that his corporeal body was one perfect and flawless. At the same time, his strength was even more powerful than before. Although his skin was overflowing with golden light, it was still soft. However, the feeling of toughness made it impossible for ordinary divine weapons with spirit runes to cut through his skin. Is this the realm that first ancestor Bodhidharma had reached? Yi Guqin felt his pores opening as if his corporeal body was breathing in and out the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. This kind of corporeal body feeling was incomparably mysterious. At this moment, he even felt that just by relying on his corporeal body, he could compete with a divine soul realm expert. Xia Yubing, let's fight again. Yi Guqin held the meteor flexible sword and slashed out again. A fierce and domineering sword slashed towards Xia Yubing. Yi Guqin, who had activated the unbreakable Vajrabody, was now a little frighteningly strong. This is really annoying. Xia Yubing's expression completely darkened. In her eyes, Yi Guqin seemed to have an inexhaustible trump card. Even such a killing move couldn't kill him. An unforeseen event had occurred. Clang! The sword edge surged, and violent ripples of sword chi surged out in all directions. The earth seemed to be churning like an earth dragon, and soil and stone fragments flew high into the air. They once again engaged in a chaotic battle. Sword chi fluctuations filled the sky. After breaking through to the invincible Vajra level, the injuries on Yi Guqin's body had also recovered a little. As for Xia Yubing, with her strength at the divine soul realm and her ice domain, she still showed signs of suppressing Yi Guqin. In fact, if it wasn't Xia Yubing, if it was anyone else, even the previous Xianing, by relying on Yi Guqin's current invincible Vajra body, they would be able to contend against him. However, Xia Yubing, who possessed the ice sword way, possessed strength that even surpassed that of Xianing from before. That was why Yi Guqin did not have an obvious advantage. This Yi Guqin is truly astonishing. His physical body is truly powerful. Many people had previously believed that Xia Yubing was about to obtain victory, yet such an unforeseen event had occurred. In particular, the phenomenon displayed by Yi Guqin's physical body caused many people to be shocked. This physical body is probably not much weaker than that of the barbarian race, who specializes in refining their physical bodies. Elder Qing He of the Sword Sect's Forest of Towers sighed. Chu Qingqi watched the battle calmly from the side, but inwardly he was thinking, "Brother Yi, is this your true trump card?" Clang, clang, clang. Sword chi rumbled, and the sound of metal clashing shook the sky. Although Yi Guqin's physical combat strength was unparalleled, he was still trapped in Xia Yubing's ice domain. As time passed, Xia Yubing's expression became more and more impatient. Although she had broken through to the divine soul realm, maintaining the ice domain consumed a lot of energy. Yi Guqin, you have exceeded Yubing's expectations time and time again, but now. Xia Yubing's voice paused. She released all of her soul power from her mind, forming a transparent ripple that swept out in all directions. Yi Guqin waited with rapt attention, tightly grasping the meteor soft sword. The way of the sword of ice far surpasses your imagination, Xia Yubing shouted. Shortly after, the earth rumbled and trembled. Everyone could see that the earth within the true energy barrier was churning, as if something was about to break out of the ground. Domain of ice, ancient profound ice sword chi, Xia Yubing shouted. The earth split open, and the ice domain trembled. Sword chi with endless chilliness broke out of the ground, directly tearing the earth apart. The sky shook, and snowflakes fluttered like dragons. The earth was torn apart, and endless sword chi was frozen. This was a shocking scene. Even the true energy barrier was trembling and freezing, as if it couldn't withstand this mighty force. At this moment, everyone was watching in a daze, as if they were possessed. Yi Guchen, this is my way of the way of the sword of ice. How are you going to block it? Xia Yubing's voice coldly shouted in the wind and snow, as if she was going to use all of her strength to deliver a killing blow to Yi Guchen. No matter what methods Yi Guchen had, no matter what trump cards Yi Guchen had, no matter what strength Yi Guchen had, this move of Xia Yubing's carried the way of the sword of ice. She wanted to completely cut off Yi Guchen's life. Rumble. Yi Guchen's figure was directly engulfed by the endless sword chi. Even the piece of earth he was standing on was torn into countless pieces. Xia Yubing seemed to be still not at ease. A cold light gathered in her eyes, and she stretched out her hand, using another secret technique. Ice sealing secret technique. Xia Yubing shouted, and the surrounding ice condensed again, completely covering Yi Guchen's body. It was as if endless ice crystals had gathered together and wanted to seal Yi Guchen's body within. This was the North River Sword King's secret technique, used to seal the body of others in ice. It was only at this moment that Xia Yubing used her ultimate move. She didn't want to give Yi Guchen any chance of survival. Again, Xia Yubing's voice was cold. After sealing Yi Guchen in ice, she used her ultimate move again. The ancient profound ice sword chi seemed to have transformed into a furious ice dragon, and once again engulfed Yi Guchen's location. Such a series of ultimate moves made everyone's heart tremble, and their eyelids twitched. They asked themselves if they were in Yi Guchen's place, under such an attack, not even dregs would be left behind. After using her ultimate move continuously, Xia Yubing was gasping for breath. The true qi in her body was on the verge of drying up, and her soul force was also greatly consumed. At the same time, her blue robe was torn in many places, revealing her blood-stained skin. The bloodstains on her body were like peach blossoms. But when she looked at the place where there wasn't any sound, her originally cold and beautiful face finally revealed a smile of relief. The originally rumbling battlefield quietened down. The earth shattered, and frost spread. Many heavens' prides were affected, and spat out blood. However, the place where Yi Guchen was standing was already sealed by a large piece of ice crystals, and at the same time, there were many cracks caused by sword chi. Not a single sound could be heard from the frozen area. She won. Xia Yubing won. Some people were at a loss, but even more people who supported Xia Yubing cheered. Has the dust settled? Xian Tai revealed a pondering expression, as if he was considering how to rope Xia Yubing in. How is that possible? Chu Qingqi frowned in disbelief. Silly boy. Su Jianshi muttered. Her lips were as pale as paper, but she was stubborn. She didn't believe Yi Guchen would lose just like that. He wasn't just Yi Guchen but also Dugu Wubai in her heart. The grudges have already been settled. Everything ends when one dies. Yi Guchen, the final victor, will still be me, Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's face was filled with joy and relief. The knot that had been weighing on her heart for a long time was finally untied. The obstacle in front of her no longer existed. Xia Yubing turned around, and with her back to the frozen block, she looked at the 7 factions and the tens of thousands of cultivators. She was basking in the glory of victory. However, rumble. The already broken earth began to tremble and shatter once again. It was as if something was about to jump out of hell. Look! Some cultivators were shocked. They reached out and pointed behind Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing's smile froze. She turned around in disbelief. The frozen block was trembling violently. Cracks spread on its surface, and the original power of the ice was quickly disintegrating. Then, accompanied by an earth-shaking rumble, the large crystal shattered, turning into ice fragments that filled the sky and shot out in all directions. A blood-colored sword intent that was as deep as an abyss shook the heavens and earth, shaking the 9 heavens. A figure holding a sword and covered in blood walked out like an Asura from hell. My sword sex Yi Guqin broke through the 18 blood prisons, experienced 9 illusions, and finally obtained this sword intent. Yi Guqin's eyes were as red as blood. His sword intent filled the sky as he looked at Xia Yubing. An Asura is heartless. You can't bear it. Chapter 208. Yi Guqin's tone was as cold as the whisper of an Asura. He slowly raised his meteor soft sword. The blade was as red as blood, and he casually swung it to one side. A glaring blood-red sword light tore through the air, plowing a 100-meter-long crack in the ground. It was just a casual strike, but it could split a 100-meter-long crack in the ground. At this moment, the sky changed color, and the crowd trembled. His black robe was torn and covered in blood. Although he had the diamond indestructible body, Xia Yubing's ultimate killing move still caused him serious injuries. However, Yi Guqin, who was bathed in blood, had a deeper understanding of the Asura sword intent. At this moment, he had completely unleashed the Asura sword intent that he had been hiding. Blood-red light filled the sky, and the sword intent swept across the area. Standing alone, the meteor soft sword in his hand seemed to be unable to withstand the baptism of the Asura sword intent, and it let out an earth-shaking cry. Standing alone, the sword cried out. Blood-red light filled the sky, and the Asura move. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. A shocked and trembling expression appeared on the faces of all the spectators. Whether it was the tens of thousands of warriors or the 7 major powers, there was only one emotion on their faces. Shock. Extreme shock. At this moment, Yi Guqin was like an Asura who had just emerged from hell. The chilling sword intent spread out and covered the entire area. Dual sword intent. Some people's teeth were chattering and they couldn't even speak clearly. As for Lu Tianying and the others who had a grudge against Yi Guqin, their bodies were trembling. They looked at Yi Guqin with extreme fear in their eyes. Peerless sword intent. Feng Manla's face was no longer calm, and it slowly turned serious. This was a power that even he couldn't ignore. Sword intent was divided into 3 grades: ordinary, peerless, and fortune. As long as one comprehended the ordinary sword intent, he or she could be called a genius among swordsmen. For example, Xia Yubing's ice sword intent, Yu Shicho's water sword intent, Yuan Mie's darkness sword intent, and so on. As for the peerless sword intent, only those with great luck and perseverance could comprehend it. The power of the peerless sword intent far surpassed the ordinary sword intent, and it could bring a sword cultivator greater strength. It could be said that in the Saint Origin dynasty, there were still a few geniuses who had comprehended ordinary sword intent. However, there were almost no geniuses who had comprehended a peerless sword intent. This was also the reason why everyone was shocked by Yi Guqin. This was because not only did Yi Guqin possess sword intent, but he also possessed dual sword intents. Not only did he possess 2 sword intents, one of them was a peerless sword intent. It's the legendary Asura sword intent of the 18 purgatories of blood. It's a sword intent that no one besides the Tower Master has comprehended. How could Yi Guqin possibly? Many people stood there in a daze, and the shocked expressions on their faces did not fade away. Yi Guqin. Morong Ditian's expression was extremely ugly. Sword intent had always been the thing that Morong Ditian yearned for the most. However, he had yet to comprehend it. On the other hand, his mortal enemy Yi Guqin possessed dual sword intents. This kind of talent and fortuitous encounter made him gnash his teeth in hatred, but he also felt an extreme sense of powerlessness in his heart. Yuan Mie, Shin Tu Miao, and the others also had cold and solemn expressions. Yi Guqin's strength was already on the same level as theirs. It even made them feel an extreme threat. On the other side, Su Jianshi and the other 2 also widened their eyes. However, Su Jianshi's eyes were overflowing with happiness. Yi Guqin's strength made her feel astonished and pleasantly surprised. Not to mention the shock of the crowd, the one who was the most emotional was undoubtedly Xia Yubing. She originally thought that the dust had settled. She originally thought that victory was in her grasp. However, the instant Xia Yubing was freed, Yi Guchen once again used such a shocking trump card. This made Xia Yubing extremely furious. She couldn't help but feel a sweetness in her throat as she spat out a mouthful of blood. Why? Xia Yubing's face was pale. At the same time, the hatred in her eyes couldn't be washed away. I obtained the North River Sword King's inheritance, and even broke through to the Divine Soul Realm. I possess the Ice Sword Dao. Why aren't you dead? Still not dead? Still not dead. Xia Yubing's long blue hair fluttered in the wind. At this moment, it was as if she was possessed. Her Ice Sword Dao completely erupted. It was a killing move that put her life on the line. Xia Yubing, there's no point in talking anymore. It's over. Yi Guchen's eyes were dyed with blood. His tone was cold. Secret soul-devouring technique. An extremely powerful suction force erupted from Yi Guchen's body. The surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth surged into his body. His cultivation was already at the 9th cycle of Qi refinement. Therefore, he could only advance in the direction of the Divine Soul Realm. Rumble. It was as if thunder was rumbling within Yi Guchen's body. After attaining the invincible Vajra body, his body could contain even more spiritual energy. Therefore, the effect of the soul-devouring technique had also multiplied. Half-step Divine Soul Realm. Breakthrough. Again. Yi Guchen coldly shouted. He also wanted to make a final gamble. Golden light surged on his body as if there was a Buddha chanting. The sword in his hand was as red as blood. It was as if there was an Azura bathing in blood. Boom. Divine Soul Realm breakthrough. A vast soul fluctuation spread out. With the help of the soul-devouring technique and the invincible Vajra body, Yi Guchen had also stepped into the Divine Soul Realm. He stood in the same realm as Xia Yubing. Xia Yubing, let's settle this in one move, Yi Guchen said. His eyes were like an Azura's. They were cold, emotionless, and filled with killing intent. Xia Yubing also seemed to have entered a trance. Her hair fluttered and her aura surged. One had the Ice Sword Dao after its transformation. The other had the peerless Azura sword intent. It was hard to say which of the two was stronger. However, at this moment, everyone's gaze was firmly fixed on the two of them. They were afraid that they would miss this shocking final confrontation. Ice Sword Dao, Ancient Profound Ice, Heaven Netherworld Absolute Sword, Soul Severing. Xia Yubing attacked with her sword. She released the Ice Sword Dao with all her strength. Together with the Ancient Profound Ice Sword Qi of the Ice Domain, she used the Heaven Netherworld Absolute Sword, a king-grade sword technique that truly belonged to the North River Sword King. The power of this move shook one's mind. Sword intent surged and cold light swept across the sky. The sky seemed to be frozen. This was a kind of aura that was determined to fight to the death. Facing Xia Yubing's final attack, Yi Guchen also attacked with his sword. The Azura sword intent pierced through the sky and earth, tearing apart all directions and sweeping through the wilderness. He slowly raised the meteor soft sword in his hand. Blood-colored sword intent filled the air. He transformed into a killing god, transformed into an Azura, transformed into a sword demon. A pair of blood-red sword wings soared into the sky from Yi Guchen's back. Countless clanging sounds rang out. It was as if millions of sword chi were resonating at the same time. It shook the heavens and earth and reversed the universe. 10,000 deities tribulation. Heaven and earth annihilation. Yi Guchen attacked with his sword. The sword wings trembled and exploded, transforming into a pair of giant wings that were hundreds of feet long. The sword wings filled the sky, shaking the firmament. Moreover, this was not just the might of the 10,000 deities tribulation. It was also supported by the peerless Azura sword intent. Yi Guchen's sword stunned everyone. 10,000 deities tribulation, heaven and earth annihilation. I use this sword to end all enmity. Yi Guchen's voice rumbled in all directions. It was as if a deity had spoken. All those enmity, all those disputes, all those enmity had been resolved by this sword strike. Boom, an indescribable sword chi swept through the surroundings. Even the true energy barrier set up by the higher-ups of the 7 major forces was instantly torn apart by the sword chi. Watch out. Retreat. The densely packed crowd retreated rapidly. There were also sounds of people vomiting blood. Some of the Sky Prides who were slightly closer were affected and vomited blood. The higher-ups of the 7 major forces and the spiritual bridge realm experts took action again. True energy surged and spread in all directions, blocking the destructive shockwave. The ground cracked and the wind and clouds swept across. This was a battle that shocked everyone. It was destined to shake the entire Saint Origin dynasty. Endless smoke and dust rose into the air. After a full quarter of an hour, it was finally blown away by the wind. At this moment, the world was dead silent. Everyone held their breaths as they watched the final battle. Who won? Who lost? Chapter 209. As the dust settled, the shattered ground was revealed to everyone's eyes. Xia Yubing and Yi Guqin were separated from each other by several tens of meters. The ground between them had already been damaged beyond recognition. Yi Guqin's body was covered in blood. Countless bloody sword marks covered his body. His flesh was badly mutilated and looked extremely terrifying. Xia Yubing was the same. Her blue dress was dyed red with blood. Time seemed to have stopped. Then Puchi. Xia Yubing's body was covered in blood. Her jade-like skin was covered in fine sword marks. At the same time, a deep wound appeared on her chest. Blood was gushing out. This was the power of the 10,000 gods' tribulation. It gathered the sword energy at a single point and suddenly exploded. It was an absolute killing move that was difficult to block. At this moment, Xia Yubing's hair was disheveled. Her hair was messy and stained with dark blood. Her entire body was in an extremely sorry state. There was not a single piece of undamaged skin. She no longer had the cold and arrogant appearance of an ice goddess. "You've lost," Yi Guqin said indifferently. 3 simple words. His tone was incomparably calm. Xia Yubing's calculations, Xia Yubing's schemes, Xia Yubing's ambitions were all destroyed by Yi Guqin's sword strike. At this moment, the hearts of all the spectators could not calm down. Xia Yubing, who they thought had a good chance of winning, had actually lost. Moreover, she had lost so miserably. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens that had been banished to the mortal world and sunk into mud. Such a dramatic result made many people's bodies stiffen. They were dumbstruck. However, when they looked at Yi Guqin, there was a sense of fear in their eyes. They could imagine that after defeating Xia Yubing, Yi Guqin's reputation would rise to another level in the Saint Origin dynasty. He would even be like the sun at noon. As for the grudges in the Sword King's secret realm, no one mentioned it again. Even those cultivators who supported Xia Yubing were speechless at this moment. They could no longer make any sound. If the final victor was Xia Yubing, then Yi Guqin would definitely be beaten up by countless people, and would be cursed endlessly. However, the victor was Yi Guqin. The winner is king, and the loser is a bandit. This was an unchanging truth. Seeing the hypocritical, mocking, and amused expressions one after another, Xia Yubing's face was as white as paper. Her smile was extremely miserable. Their gazes were originally directed at Yi Guqin, but now, they were all focused on her. Xia Yubing once again coughed out blood, mixed with her shattered internal organs. Yi Guqin's myriad deities' tribulation had already destroyed her heart meridians. The current Xia Yubing was merely struggling at death's door. Her life like a candle in the wind. "Xia Yubing, it's over," said Yi Guqin. Although he had also suffered heavy injuries, he was clearly in a much better state than Xia Yubing. Ha! 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 Xia Yubing's hair was disheveled as she began to laugh like a madman. Desolate laughter echoed in all directions. Many people sighed as they watched the once high and mighty heaven's pride turn into such a crazy and pathetic state. However, Yi Guqin's eyes did not waver in the slightest. From the moment Xia Yubing chose to cooperate with Gu Xiaoyang to attack him in the Sword King Mystery Realm, her miserable ending today was already set in stone. It could be said that the evils she brought upon herself were the hardest to bear. Yi Guqin did not feel the slightest bit of pity for Xia Yubing. "Yi Guqin, do you think you've won?" Xia Yubing opened her mouth, but blood was still gushing out from her mouth. Her life was like a candle in the wind. "So, you still have a trick up your sleeve?" Yi Guchen's eyes were very calm. He did not believe that Xia Yubing still had a trump card that could turn defeat into victory. I have indeed lost, but this world is very big. Since you say that I'm a frog at the bottom of a well, and a summer insect cannot talk about ice, then what are you? In the eyes of a true heaven's pride, you are only an ant. Xia Yubing coughed out blood continuously, but her tone was extremely bitter. Although she was in a miserable state, a trace of vengeful madness suddenly appeared in her eyes at this moment. The origin ring on her finger flashed, and a jade scroll overflowing with starlight appeared in her hand. Xia Yubing poured the last of her true qi into the jade scroll, and then fiercely crushed it. Yi Guchen's eyebrows twitched, and his figure instantly rushed towards Xia Yubing, sending her flying with a kick. Puchi! Xia Yubing once again spat out a large mouthful of blood. Her sternum cracked, and she fiercely smashed into the ground, falling into a pool of blood. However, the starlight jade scroll had already been shattered. Following the shattering of the jade scroll, an indescribable fluctuation spread out with a loud rumble. Soon after, everyone was somewhat shocked to see that the space in the air violently shook. Countless starlight condensed and formed, and in the end, formed a starlight gate. The starlight gate rippled with boundless and deep fluctuations, as if it was the door of a god. That's... Yi Guchen's eyes darkened. Many martial warriors also looked at the starry sky gate in bewilderment. That's a spatial tunnel. Ordinary practitioners were not too clear about it, but the higher-ups of the 7 great powers all knew that it was the fluctuation of a spatial tunnel. Such a method of constructing a spatial tunnel was clearly not something that Xia Yubing had the qualifications to come into contact with. However, they were all very puzzled, as they did not know where Xia Yubing's spatial jade scroll came from. Only Xia Yubing herself, after seeing the starlight gate, revealed a vicious smile. Yi Guchen, do you think you can win just because you defeated me? No, you will forever be someone else's stepping stone. Rumble. The starlight gate trembled, and spatial ripples spread out in all directions. This unforeseen event was out of everyone's expectations. Everyone's gazes blankly looked at the starlight gate. The heavens and earth seemed to be silent, and time slowly passed. Finally, the starlight gate slowly opened, and 2 figures with true qi wings on their backs slowly flew out. This was a pair of godlike young man and woman. Their temperaments were extraordinary, and they had an innate aura of superiority. However, when he saw the young man, Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly focused. Immediately, uncontrollable hatred and anger surged within him. This was practically Yi Guchen's instinctive reaction. That hatred gushed out from every pore of his body, and he was simply unable to suppress it. The young man wore the Big Dipper robe, and wore the Mizar star crown on his head. His face was handsome, and his skin contained the splendor of stars. He was like an innate god, and his body was surrounded by specks of starlight. The true qi wings on his back revealed his powerful life and death threshold realm. At such a young age, such a realm, in the entire Saint Origin dynasty, there was no one who could rival him. The young man did not speak, and only calmly stood there, as if he had a strange temperament, causing everyone's gazes to fall on him. This was a kind of momentum, as if he was the center of the heavens and earth. The resplendent starlight emitted endless brilliance, causing everyone's attention to be involuntarily attracted to him. It could be said that no matter where this young man went, he would be the center of attention, and would be worshipped from all directions. Beside the young man was a girl wearing a starry cloud robe. The girl was also an expert of the life and death threshold realm. Her face was like jade, and her eyes were like stars. She carried an unfathomable sense of nobility and arrogance. Above the vault of heaven, there seemed to be starlight surging. This was a strange phenomenon that caused one's heart to palpitate. As the young man and woman stood amidst the starlight, they were like gods, and their auras covered the entire place. How could my Starry Universe Sword Pavilion's Starry Sky Passage be teleported here? Junior brother, could it be that you're mistaken? The girl spoke, and her gaze swept across everyone present. Her beautiful eyes carried a trace of arrogance and disdain. That's right. This teleportation jade strip was given to her by me. I never thought that she would actually use it. The young man spoke, and his gaze fell slightly. He saw Xia Yubing lying in a pool of blood, looking extremely miserable. Then his gaze shifted again, and fell on Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin also looked over, and their gazes met for the first time. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment. Gu Xiao Yang. Chapter 210. The young man who had appeared from the Starry Gate was Gu Xiaoyang, the proud son of Starry Sword Pavilion who had destroyed Yi Guqin's sword vein and taken away his innate sword embryo. Yi Guqin's tone was extremely cold, and the killing intent in his heart soared uncontrollably. Their gazes collided in the void, and sparks seemed to fly. Gu Xiaoyang had a calm temperament, and his eyes were as deep as the stars. No one would have guessed that he was the young man who had cruelly taken away Yi Guqin's innate sword embryo with the secret skill of wedding dress. The pain of his flesh being peeled off was still imprinted in Yi Guqin's soul. The innate sword embryo was the foundation of Yi Guqin's strength as a 7th-grade heaven's pride. Moreover, the innate sword embryo was a gifted ability that had existed in Yi Guqin's dantian since birth. Gu Xiaoyang's cruel secret skill of wedding dress was like digging out Yi Guqin's heart and lungs. Yi Guqin would never forget the despair of having his talent taken away. Gu Xiaoyang, who had brought Yi Guqin such despair, was also the enemy he had to kill. Now his blood feud was right in front of him. When enemies meet, their eyes turn red. Looking at Gu Xiaoyang and the others standing in the sky, the surrounding warriors were almost suffocating. Although many of them did not know Gu Xiaoyang's identity, the way he appeared made it clear that his background was not simple. The people from the 7 great forces vaguely knew something, and they all looked at Gu Xiaoyang with a solemn expression. Starry Sword Pavilion was an overlord force in the Nantian region. It was one of the 4 great sword pavilions, and it had an extraordinary background. In the current sword pavilion, there were even 7 extraordinary geniuses that soared into the world, and they were called the 7 Great Bears by the outside world. Gu Xiaoyang was one of the 7 Great Bears, Kaiyang. I heard that Yi Guqin has a grudge against Gu Xiaoyang. His innate sword embryo was taken away by Gu Xiaoyang. That's right. Yi Guqin is already so monstrous now. If his innate sword embryo hadn't been snatched away, how strong would his innate talent be? However, things don't seem to be looking good right now. The sky prides of the Starry Sword Pavilion aren't people that can be trifled with. The people of the 7 major forces were whispering to each other. They were all discussing. Young Master Gu, save Yubing. When Xia Yubing, who was lying in a pool of blood and on the verge of death, saw Gu Xiaoyang appear, an intense desire to live emerged on her blood-stained face. In her eyes, only Gu Xiaoyang had the ability to save her. Gu Xiaoyang glanced at Xia Yubing indifferently and said, Xia Yubing, you've disappointed me too much. In the Sword King's secret realm, you said that if you obtained the Sword King's inheritance, you would be able to completely eliminate the hidden danger Yi Guqin. But now you need to crush a spatial jade strip and ask me for help. You're wasting my time. What? Hearing Gu Xiaoyang's words, everyone was stunned. From Gu Xiaoyang's words, they were able to hear a deeper meaning. Ignoring Xia Yubing's deathly pale face, Gu Xiaoyang said with faint disappointment, I admire your ambition and your unwillingness to submit to others. In addition, I also need an innate sword embryo. That's why I agreed to help you cripple Yi Guqin. In the end, you're actually in such a miserable state right now. How disappointing. Gu Xiaoyang's words were like a huge rock thrown into the ocean, causing a huge wave to rise. What? It wasn't Yi Guqin who plotted against Xia Yubing in the Sword King's secret realm, but Xia Yubing herself harbored evil intentions and asked Gu Xiaoyang to help her. I never thought that Xia Yubing would be such a bitch. Doesn't that mean we've all misunderstood the sword sect? The sword sect's Yi Guqin is the true victim. Xia Yubing is that vicious bitch. Gu Xiaoyang's words had undoubtedly revealed the truth of the Sword King's secret realm. To Gu Xiaoyang, he didn't care about the clamoring of these ants. However, Xia Yubing's face was ashen, as if she'd lost all hope. Her mask had finally been mercilessly taken off at this moment. Everyone saw her dark and ugly side. Soon after, she felt numerous gazes land on her. It was no longer the worship, respect, and admiration of the past. Instead, it was disdain, coldness, and ridicule. They were looking at her as if they were looking at the dirtiest thing in the world. No. No. It's not like that. To someone like Xia Yubing, these gazes were undoubtedly like being sliced into pieces. It made her feel so much pain that she wished she was dead. It was even to the extent that she saw Xia Yinger and her other relatives looking at her with pale faces from these gazes. No. Impossible. So Yi Guchen wasn't in the wrong. It was big sister Yubing. Why? Xia Yinger was simply about to go crazy. This sort of disparity caused her to lose her mind. As for those who'd insulted Yi Guchen and called him a despicable person and a hypocrite, their cheeks were burning with pain. They felt so ashamed that they couldn't show their faces, and wanted nothing more than to find a hole to hide in. Poochie. As if she couldn't take any more blows, Xia Yubing's eyes were filled with incomparable hatred. She was so angry that a large mouthful of blood spurted out. Yubing. I regret. These were Xia Yubing's last words. She completely fell into a pool of blood. Her life force was gone. Her eyes were filled with unreconciled despair and extreme regret. She died with her eyes wide open. The heaven's proud daughter that was admired by tens of thousands of people died under everyone's disdain and curses. This could be said to be the greatest irony. Seeing Xia Yubing's life force completely cut off, Yi Guchen felt a trace of worry disappear from the bottom of his heart. It was as if a knot had been untied. Although Xia Yubing had died, an even greater danger was in front of him. Yi Guchen's gaze was firmly fixed on the youth standing in the sky. Gu Xiaoyang was an even more powerful and terrifying enemy than Xia Yubing. No matter if it was identity, strength, or background, Yi Guchen was far too lacking compared to Gu Xiaoyang. Junior brother, this is the pitiful person whose innate sword embryo was stolen by you. Isn't he a bit too weak? Beside Gu Xiaoyang, the beautiful woman wearing a starry cloud robe laughed contemptuously. She was one of the 7 great bears, the Alcade star. Her name was Song Yiyao. Gu Xiaoyang shook his head slightly and said casually, Yeah, I thought Xia Yubing would be able to solve this problem. But in the end, she's also a piece of trash. I still need to do it myself. Gu Xiaoyang. Yi Guchen held the meteor soft sword. His eyes were cold and sharp. His body was like an abyss as a blood-colored sword intent soared into the sky and filled the sky. Oh, sword intent. Gu Xiaoyang looked at Yi Guchen. His starry eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. Song Yuyao was also a bit surprised. She said, Tisk Tsk, a 7th grade prodigy with a peerless sword intent. If junior brother didn't steal his innate sword embryo and cripple his cultivation, he shouldn't be as weak as he is now. So what if he has sword intent? Gu Xiaoyang said with a cold smile. He slowly raised his hand and a similarly vast sword intent surged out. The entire sky almost instantly turned into a starry sky. Spots of light flickered. They were all the sharpness of the sword qi. This was Gu Xiaoyang's starry sword intent. It was also a peerless sword intent. Gosh, Gu Xiaoyang also has sword intent. Many people were shocked. They looked at the dark starry sky. There was a chilling sword qi surging in it. Sword intent was something that only 1 in 10,000 sword cultivators could have. But Gu Xiaoyang was one of the 7 great bears of the Starry Sword Pavilion. It would be surprising if he didn't have sword intent. I am Gu Xiaoyang of the Starry Sword Pavilion. Today I want to kill Yi Guchen. Whoever stops me will be exterminated. Chapter 211. Gu Xiaoyang put his hands behind his back and said indifferently. He had the right to be arrogant and had the confidence to say such words. After fusing with Yi Guchen's innate sword embryo and his own star eyes, he became a 7th grade genius. He was highly valued by the Starry Sword Pavilion and stood out from the 7 Big Dipper warriors, becoming one of the seeds of the Starry Sword Pavilion. As soon as Gu Xiaoyang said that, gasps could be heard from all directions. This was too overbearing. He did not take the 7 major forces seriously and wanted to kill Yi Guchen. Many warriors looked at the 7 major forces because Yi Guchen was now the champion of the elite club. Gu Xiaoyang's presumptuous request to kill Yi Guchen was a violation of the rules of the elite club. However, It was out of everyone's expectation that the higher-ups of the 7 forces were all looking at Gu Xiaoyang with cold and solemn faces. Even the Sun Moon Hallmaster of the Limitless Sword Sect, Xian Tai, did not say a word. He frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. They were not afraid of Gu Xiaoyang. After all, no matter how talented Gu Xiaoyang was, he was only at the life and death realm. The 7 major forces were not afraid of him. They were afraid of the Starry Sword Pavilion behind Gu Xiaoyang. Perhaps most warriors did not know much about the Starry Sword Pavilion, but the people of the 7 major forces knew a thing or two. Lord Feng Manlu. Chu Qingqi wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Feng Manlu's eyes were still empty, but he knew what was going on with his soul sense. However, his expression did not change at all. No hurry. Let's wait and see. Feng Manlu whispered. Looking at the 7 major forces who remained silent, the warriors below felt their hearts skip a beat. Obviously, Gu Xiaoyang's identity as a genius of the Starry Sword Pavilion had intimidated them, and they could not stop him. Seeing that there was no one in the way, Gu Xiaoyang smiled contemptuously. He looked at Yi Guqin expressionlessly. It was as if he was not looking at a person, but an ant that he could crush at any time. Yi Guqin, your sword vein was destroyed and your sword embryo was taken away. It is indeed beyond my expectations that you could come this far and defeat Xia Yubing, who inherited the Sword King's inheritance. Gu Xiaoyang said indifferently. Gu Xiaoyang, it won't be that easy for you to kill me. Yi Guqin's face was cold. He had just fought a great battle with Xia Yubing and was heavily injured. It was difficult for him to display his full strength. Moreover, even if Yi Guqin was at his peak state, he would not be able to fight with Gu Xiaoyang, who was to life and death realm. This was the difference in their backgrounds. However, there was no fear in Yi Guqin's eyes at all. His Azura to the god. Yi Guqin wanted to sever the 3 strands of karma. Now that Bei Danggui and Xia Yubing were dead, only Gu Xiaoyang was left. Yi Guqin even remembered what his aunt Xian Su had said. When he could defeat Gu Xiaoyang and take back his innate sword embryo, Xian Su would tell him some things, including his background and his parents. Therefore, no matter what, Yi Guqin must kill Gu Xiaoyang. However, the difference in cultivation between him and Gu Xiaoyang was too big. It was hard to say if he could even survive this. Actually, it doesn't matter to me whether I kill you or not. We are not from the same world. I should even thank you. Gu Xiaoyang paused and then smiled. If not for your innate sword embryo, I would not have broken through life and death realms so quickly, and become the leader of the 7 great bears. I would not have obtained the title of one of the top 10 young masters, and become young master Nebula of the Starry Sword Pavilion. If not for your innate sword embryo, I would not have become the 9th on the Dragon Phoenix list of the South Horizon region. If not for your innate sword embryo, I would not have won the favor of Yi Songyue, the peerless fairy of the Misty Sword Pavilion. She is an 8th grade genius and has the innate divine embryo. She can resonate with the innate sword embryo. When she comes out of seclusion in 2 years, I can dual cultivate with her and comprehend the innate indestructible sword embryo together. All of this is because of you, Yi Guqin. So don't you think I should thank you? Gu Xiaoyang smiled sincerely, as if he was really thanking Yi Guqin. However, the more sincere he was, the more it represented his ridicule and contempt for Yi Guqin. This was a straightforward mockery. He wanted to see Yi Guqin's anger, unwillingness, and extreme despair, because he, who stood at the top, would occasionally see the anger of an ant. It was interesting. However, what made Gu Xiaoyang's smile disappear was that Yi Guqin's face was expressionless. Even the anger that was almost instinctive to the bone had calmed down. Oh, Yi Guqin, don't you have any thoughts about my gratitude? Gu Xiaoyang asked in a slightly heavy tone. Is it necessary? Yi Guqin looked straight at Gu Xiaoyang. Bei Danggui wanted to plot against me, but he died at my hands. Xia Yubing wanted to replace me and take everything from me, but she also died at my hands. And you, Gu Xiaoyang, although you took my innate sword embryo, you will still die at my hands in the future. Yi Guqin's tone was calm, as if he was saying something very ordinary. However, these words made Gu Xiaoyang's eyes darken. Before Gu Xiaoyang could say anything, Song Yuyao, who was beside him, laughed as if she had heard the funniest joke. Heh, how interesting. To actually meet such an aunt who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Junior brother, it seems that after you took his sword embryo, even his mind became abnormal. Song Yuyao's tone was quite vicious. As one of the 7 great bears of the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion, she had always thought highly of herself and looked down on others. After Gu Xiaoyang merged with Yi Guqin's sword embryo and became the seat of the Starry Universe Sword Pavilion, Song Yuyao had completely thrown herself into his embrace. At this moment, when she heard Yi Guqin say such words, she naturally couldn't accept it. She felt as if she had heard the biggest joke in the world. Although Xia Yubing's vision is short, Yi Guqin, your vision isn't that long either. A frog at the bottom of a well like you naturally doesn't know how vast the South Horizon region is. Gu Xiaoyang shook his head. He didn't say anything else. The true energy in his body gathered, and the sea of qi in his dantian and mind rolled. Rumble. The sky filled with stars seemed to be rolling. An endless sword intent surged. As a terrifying heavens pried at the life and death chamber, Gu Xiaoyang's casual attack was far more powerful than Xia Yubing's ultimate move. Every single star in the sky turned into a ray of sword qi. They fell like rain, carrying the power of the stars as they charged toward Yi Guqin. He didn't directly use his ultimate move, because he still wanted to see Yi Guqin struggle to survive under his hands. Facing the starry sword qi that filled the sky, Yi Guqin's eyes turned blood red. He didn't give up. Holding the meteor soft sword, a terrifying Shura sword intent surged out. Gu Xiaoyang, whatever moves you have, use them. Yi Guqin was like a moth flying into a flame, releasing the purest Shura sword intent. Even if his body was burned, he would wash the sky with blood. Chapter 212. Yi Guqin swung the meteorite soft sword in his hand and sword qi swept out in all directions. Looking at Yi Guqin who attacked with his sword, all the spectating warriors were filled with admiration. Just this courage alone was enough to make others admire him. However, Gu Xiaoyang, who saw Yi Guqin swinging his sword, had a mocking smile on his face. In his opinion, such courage was meaningless because the difference in cultivation between him and Yi Guqin was too big. They were not on the same level in all aspects. Rumbling sounds continued to resound as the stellar sword qi and Yi Guqin's crimson sword qi collided. The stellar sword essence was the same as the Shura sword essence. They were both exceptional sword essences. However, Yi Guqin's current cultivation was far inferior to Gu Xiaoyang's. Therefore, this blow caused Yi Guqin to cough up blood repeatedly. His shoulder was penetrated, revealing a terrifying bloody hole. Puchi. Yi Guqin groaned in his chest as he was suppressed by the stellar sword qi. The pressure was like thousands of mountains pressing down on him. However, Yi Guqin's eyes were still focused as if he could not feel any pain. He did not mind the heavy injury on his body at all. The blood in his body roared as his wound rapidly healed. The perfect body coupled with the invincible Vajra body allowed Yi Guqin's body to have an abnormal strength and recovery ability. Oh, your body is quite good. Looking at Yi Guqin's body that was shining with golden light, Gu Xiaoyang's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. However, that was all. He struck again. However, at this moment, a cyan sword pattern emblem suddenly appeared on the back of Gu Xiaoyang's hand. Just as the emblem appeared on the back of Gu Xiaoyang's hand, a green sword pattern emblem also appeared on the back of Yi Guqin's hand, who was waving his sword to resist the star sword qi. This is... Gu Xiaoyang and Yi Guqin felt their hearts tremble at the same time. Yi Guqin thought, this is the emblem I got after I became the 9th generation sword master in the swordsmanship seeking steel. The 8th generation sword master, Yi Tianxing, once said that if I met the other 9th generation sword master in the future, I would be able to sense it. Could it be? He raised his head and saw the surprise in Gu Xiaoyang's eyes. As expected, Yi Guqin's eyes were sharp. Gu Xiaoyang was actually one of the 9 generations of sword grandmasters. Yi Guqin, you've given me quite a pleasant surprise. It seems like I have no choice but to kill you today. Gu Xiaoyang smiled faintly. Only Gu Xiaoyang and Yi Guqin knew the meaning of this emblem. Outsiders would not be able to see it, nor would they notice this detail. Although Gu Xiaoyang didn't know how Yi Guqin had obtained the sequence insignia, as long as he killed Yi Guqin, he could snatch Yi Guqin's sequence insignia. Therefore, Gu Xiaoyang's attacks became heavier. Like boiling a frog in warm water, he slowly increased the power. He wanted to see Yi Guqin struggle to survive under his hands and finally die in despair. This scene made many warriors' hearts tremble, and some girls' eyes even turned red. A young sword grandmaster of the Saint Origin dynasty was betrayed by his childhood sweetheart. His sword vein was destroyed, and his sword embryo was stolen. He had to bear the infamy of being innocent, but he still endured the humiliation and rose again in the end. He defeated the Sword King's inheritance, Xia Yubing. It could be said that this was not something an ordinary person could do, but Yi Guqin did it. But now, Yi Guqin was fighting an unfair battle with Gu Xiaoyang. Is Sword Grandmaster Yi Guqin going to die like this? What a pity. Someone sighed. He was like a blazing sun, rising strongly, but he's going to fall so soon? How sad, how sad. Although most of the warriors were sighing, there were still some who rejoiced in Yi Guqin's misfortune. For example, Qin Baijian and the other two experts, Lu Tianying, Xianing, Morong Ditian, and Prince Yuani all had a carefree smile on their faces. They were very happy to see Yi Guqin fall, because Yi Guqin's performance was too stunning. It was like a thorn stuck in their throats. If they didn't get rid of it, they wouldn't feel at ease. Looking at the one-sided suppression, many warriors turned their faces away. They couldn't bear to watch anymore. In the sky, Song Yuyao looked at Yi Guqin, who was struggling under Gu Xiaoyang's attacks, with great interest. Gu Xiaoyang was very undisciplined and casual. Very weak, too weak. Such an exceptional sword intent was actually comprehended by you. It's simply a waste of a heavenly treasure. Gu Xiaoyang shook his head. Then, he condensed his words and said, "Since you are also a 9th-generation sword grandmaster, then I will let you see what a true sword grandmaster's absolute art is." After Gu Xiaoyang finished speaking, he slowly raised his hand. With a loud bang, a shocking sword aura filled the air. It wasn't the power of the star's sword intent, but an ultimate move. Of course, anyone could see that it wasn't a complete sword move. However, its power was enough to make people tremble in fear. Sun-slashing brilliant void sword aura. With a bang, sword aura burst out from Gu Xiaoyang's palm. A red sword aura seemed to cross the sky, as if it was going to slash the sun. That kind of fluctuation was shocking. Sword Grandmaster's absolute art. Yi Guqin's eyes narrowed. The Sword Grandmaster's absolute art of the Sword Grandmaster's lineage was the absolute art created by each generation of Sword Grandmasters. The only thing Yi Guqin knew now was that he was refining the unique skill of the 8th generation Sword Master, the 108,000 heaven-splitting sword souls, and the unique skill of the 7th generation Sword Master, the sacred sword of heaven and earth, which he had performed once. Obviously, the sun-slashing brilliant void sword aura that Gu Xiaoyang was displaying was also an absolute art of the Sword Grandmaster's lineage. Although Gu Xiaoyang hadn't fully displayed this absolute art, its power was already shocking. Sword Soul Go. Yi Guqin's blood and qi rumbled. His 1,000-feet-long golden sea of qi was circulating to its limit. Coupled with the soul-devouring secret technique, his cultivation had already reached the divine soul realm. Therefore this time, Yi Guqin didn't use 5,000 sword souls of the heaven-splitting sword, but 10,000 of them. Tens of thousands of sky-splitting sword souls swept out of Yi Guqin's body like a shocking torrent. The power of the heaven-splitting sword souls was calculated by numbers. The more there were, the stronger the combined power. At this moment, the 10,000 swords were unleashed together. The sword aura buzzed as if it had formed a giant azure sword aura dragon. It circled around Yi Guqin and soared into the sky. This scene was extremely shocking. Yi Guqin actually hid this move. What kind of move is this? I didn't expect the Sword Grandmaster to hold back when he was fighting Xia Yubing. He didn't display his full power. Many cultivators were stunned. Some were speechless. At this moment, Yi Guqin's extraordinary performance once again shocked them. Oh, it's also the Sword Grandmaster's secret technique? As a ninth-generation sword grandmaster, Gu Xiaoyang immediately sensed that Yi Guqin's move was also the sword grandmaster's secret technique. However, in Gu Xiaoyang's opinion, although the power of this move had exceeded his expectations, it still couldn't change anything. With a loud bang, the brilliant void sword chi of the sun-slashing sword hit the torrent of heaven-splitting sword souls. As expected, after blocking it for a moment, the scarlet sword light tore through the heaven-splitting sword soul torrent. This wasn't because the heaven-splitting sword soul torrent was inferior to the brilliant void sword aura. It was because their cultivation realms weren't on the same level. Yi Guqin directly used Luo Tian's protection and was swept by the sword light. The brilliant void sword aura was like a hot knife cutting through cheese. It directly cut through the guardian Vajra's shadow. Even though Yi Guqin had the indestructible Vajra body, a huge sword wound opened on his chest. Poochie! Yi Guqin's body crashed to the ground. His body was covered in blood and his aura was weak. Chapter 213. Everyone sucked in a deep breath as they watched Yi Guqin being severely injured by Gu Xiaoyang with a single strike. A Heaven's Pride that could enter the top 3 on the Heaven's Pride list couldn't even withstand a single strike from Gu Xiaoyang. Of course, this was because the gap between Yi Guqin and Gu Xiaoyang was too great. If they were at the same cultivation level, everyone believed that Yi Guqin wouldn't lose. At the very least, he wouldn't lose so miserably. This was an unfair battle, a game of cat and mouse. Many people couldn't bear to see this scene. Lord Feng Manlu. Chu Qingqi's eyes were filled with anxiety. Feng Manlu's expression turned serious, but he still shook his head. On the other side, Elder Qing he said hesitantly, "My lord, he's a young sword master after all. Plus, he's so talented. To test if a piece of iron can be forged into a peerless sword, we have to see if he can go through a lot of tempering." Feng Manlu's voice was still calm. Could it be? Chu Qingqi's heart skipped a beat. Feng Manlu, the lightless sword king, who had always had a high status in the sword sect forest and didn't care about worldly affairs, actually wanted to take in a disciple? Thinking of this, Chu Qingqi paid even more attention to Yi Guqin. On the other side, Xian Tai's mind was also racing. Since Yi Guqin has a grudge against the Starry Sword Pavilion Heaven's Pride, it'll be risky if we take him in. However, we can't give up on the Venerable One's cave dwelling, so. Xian Tai narrowed his eyes. His original plan of forcibly taking Yi Guqin into the limitless sword sect also changed slightly. After all, taking in Yi Guqin wasn't the only option to obtain the Venerable One's cave dwelling. Everyone had different thoughts as they looked at the severely injured Yi Guqin. Some felt pity for him, some wanted to watch a good show, and some wanted to gloat. Yi Guqin, you're just an ant. How can you overturn the heavens? Gu Xiaoyang's eyes were filled with weariness. Yi Guqin stood up with difficulty. The terrifying sword wound on his chest was rapidly healing. However, it was clear that such a wound could not be healed in a short amount of time. "Junior brother, stop dawdling and wasting our time," said Song Yiyao, looking down at Yi Guqin. Her eyes were filled with annoyance, as if she were looking at a mosquito. Yi Guqin. Outside, Su Jianshi couldn't hold it in anymore. Even Fairy Qin and Bai Yanji couldn't stop her. Su Jianshi's figure flashed as she entered the dangerous battlefield. On the other side, Shuer was also struggling. She wanted to enter but was stopped by a kind martial artist. For such a little girl to enter, she would undoubtedly be courting death. Yi Guqin's body swayed as he coughed up blood. He turned to look at Su Jianshi and coldly shouted, "Su Jianshi, leave! No, silly brat, I won't allow you to do it alone." Su Jianshi's eyes were red as she pulled out the green cicada sword while gritting her teeth. The spectators sighed at the sight of Su Jianshi rushing into the battlefield. They lamented that Yi Guqin had such a lover who could share his trials and tribulations with him. At the edge of the battlefield, the gray-robed woman was trembling. Her jade-like hands were tightly clenched. The blood that seeped out from her palms was already cold. She didn't know what to do. Moreover, there was already a new lover by Yi Guqin's side. This caused her heart to ache even more than when Yi Guqin revealed his identity as the Sword Devil. So affectionate. Yu Yao, I don't want anyone to disturb my good show. Gu Xiaoyang shook his head with a cold glint in his eyes. Fine. Song Yu Yao's figure flashed as the true qi wings on her back fluttered. She seemed to have teleported as she stood between Yi Guqin and Su Jianshi. Get out of my way. Su Jianshi's eyes were filled with tears. Her heart was bleeding after seeing Yi Guqin's current state. What did you say? Lowly girl. Song Yu Yao's beautiful face instantly changed. She was one of the 7 great bears of the Starry Sword Pavilion. Her appearance, strength, and background were all extraordinary. She had never been scolded like this before, let alone an ant in her eyes. You're courting death. Song Yu Yao's powerful true qi suppressed Su Jianshi before she slapped her. Bang! Su Jianshi retreated and spat out blood. A bright red palm print appeared on her jade-like face. Stop! Murderous intent gathered in Yi Guqin's eyes after seeing this. He didn't care about himself, but he couldn't bear to see her being humiliated like this. Boom! Yi Guqin almost squeezed out all of his real qi. An even more violent real qi fluctuation spread out with a loud bang. Just how big is this sword sex qi ocean? Many people's eyes almost popped out. They didn't expect Yi Guqin to still have such vigorous true qi. At the same time, the Shura sword intent spread out once more like a sea of blood. A fierce murderous intent spread out in all directions. God-slaying sword art, 3 paths. A violent blood-colored sword river soared into the sky. The God-slaying sword art focused on killing. When combined with the Shura sword intent, the power was even more shocking. His sword was aimed at Song Yu Yao. At such a close distance and the sudden attack, even Song Yu Yao was stunned for a moment. She didn't expect Yi Guqin to have the guts to attack her. However, Song Yu Yao was still a life and death chamber expert. At the critical moment, she still threw out a palm. Her true qi surged and starlight exploded. Puchi! Yi Guqin was once again pushed back. However, Song Yu Yao didn't retreat. A trace of sword qi brushed past her face, leaving behind a small cut. Song Yu Yao's head buzzed as killing intent surged in her beautiful eyes. How dare you hurt me? Not only will you die, but everyone related to you will also die. Song Yu Yao's beautiful eyes were spitting fire. Her tone was harsh and venomous. Senior sister. Let me do it. Yi Guqin, whoever started the trouble should end it. So I'll use your innate sword embryo to end your life. Gu Xiaoyang was already impatient. He no longer had the intention to tease Yi Guqin. He was like a cat that was tired of playing with a mouse. He was ready to kill Yi Guqin. Gu Xiaoyang activated his true qi, and a wisp of innate chaotic qi surged out from his dantian. Immediately, a sparkling and translucent sword embryo broke out of his body. This sword embryo was the size of a palm. Although it wasn't very big, it was glowing like a beautiful jade. Innate chaotic qi was faintly emitted from the sword body. It had a mysterious intent that seemed to be able to cut through the heavens. When this sword embryo appeared, the qi of heaven and earth was disturbed. The sky changed color and the clouds surged. Is that the innate sword embryo? Many people were shocked. The people from the 7 major forces also looked over. A 7th grade heavenly talent's special ability was not to be underestimated. It was precisely because they were blessed by the heavens that their special ability was extraordinary. Yi Guqin looked at the sword embryo abruptly, and a feeling of connection with the sword embryo arose. It was a feeling that could not be separated. Yi Guqin even had a premonition that if he could take back this innate sword embryo, his strength would undergo a qualitative change. It would be an earth-shattering transformation. Not only that, but he also had the taboo forging technique. If he could use the innate sword embryo to forge a sword and cultivate both sword and life, it would have a great effect. In other words, the innate sword embryo was also a divine item that Yi Guqin needed to forge his own peerless sword. Yi Guqin had to get the innate sword embryo. This is my special ability. How can it hurt me? Yi Guqin shouted. His qi and blood burned, and his qi rumbled. It was as if he wanted to summon the sword embryo back. The innate sword embryo suddenly trembled, as if it was unwilling to devour its original owner. Ha! If it was so easy to be taken away by you, then it would be a waste of my sword pavilion's efforts. Gu Xiaoyang sneered and formed a sword seal. In an instant, Countless starry runes appeared on the sword embryo, imprisoning it again. With a whoosh, the innate sword embryo carried chaotic chi and crossed the sky. No one had the ability to stop this chaotic sword. This sword embryo seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth. Feng Manlu, who had been calm all this time, finally stood up slowly. However, just as he was about to attack, 3 figures blocked his way. They were Qin Baijian, Mo Yunzi, and the Spring Cloud Pavilion Master. Wind Sword King, please watch the battle, Mo Yunzi said with a fake smile. You think you can stop me with just the 3 of you? Feng Manlu raised his eyebrows. Another person appeared. Xiantai of the Limitless Sword Sect. What if I join? Xiantai's face was cold. Whoosh. It was also at this moment that Feng Manlu missed a good opportunity. The Khanate sword embryo moved so fast that it seemed to have pierced through the void and rushed toward Yi Guqin with a deadly momentum. I will not allow myself to be captured. Yi Guqin held the soft meteorite sword in his hand and faced the innate sword embryo. His true energy rumbled as he prepared to use the 10,000 god tribulation again. Although he knew that he would die, he still wanted to fight with his life on the line. However, at this moment, a beautiful figure in green blocked his way. She floated in front of him like a startled swan. Her figure was slender and weak like an autumn leaf, but at this moment, she was the toughest barrier. Yi Guqin's gaze froze at this moment. The figure turned around and looked at Yi Guqin. There was a smile in her eyes, but there were also tears. Yi Guqin would never be able to forget the beautiful smile on her face for the rest of his life. Silly boy, remember this lady. Pucci. The innate sword embryo pierced her heart. Blood splattered along with tears, forming a poem. Chapter 214. At this moment, the world was silent, as if it had suddenly fallen silent. Yi Guqin could only see Su Jianshi with tears in her eyes and a smile on her lips. Without any hesitation, she stood in front of Yi Guqin and blocked the fatal blow from the innate sword embryo. Su Jianshi. Yi Guqin's mind buzzed like thunder. He was never afraid of death, which was why he dared to fight Gu Xiaoyang so fearlessly. But that didn't mean he could sit back and watch someone who cared about him die in front of him. Boring. Gu Xiaoyang's expression didn't change at all. He wanted to control the innate sword embryo to attack again. But the moment the innate sword embryo pierced Su Jianshi's heart, golden chains suddenly appeared. In her heart, dense golden rune chains suddenly appeared. These chains were like vines, wrapping around Su Jianshi's heart layer by layer. The innate sword embryo's primal chaos sword tip landed on the chains and exploded with boundless light. Immediately after, many of those densely packed golden rune chains seemed to have shattered. Then, a blazing golden sword ray burst out from Su Jianshi's heart. It was as if the light of the sun had gathered. It seemed to be protecting its master, but it also seemed to be a passive counterattack. The innate sword embryo seemed to have sensed a power that could threaten it. It buzzed and trembled. The primal chaos sword aura clashed with the golden sword ray, setting off a huge wave. It was as if a meteor had exploded, sending shockwaves in all directions. Then the golden sword ray broke through the primal chaos aura and went straight for Gu Xiaoyang. What's this? Gu Xiaoyang's usually indifferent expression changed slightly. The starry sword essence rumbled and turned into a sky full of starry sword chi to resist the golden sword light. On the other side, Su Jianshi spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. Yi Guqin flashed forward and hugged Su Jianshi's slender body that was covered in blood. You'll be fine. Yi Guqin channeled his true chi into Su Jianshi's body and wanted to take out a pill for her. No need. Su Jianshi's face was pale. As she spoke, blood seeped out of her pink lips. She smiled, but she was extremely weak. I won't let you die. Yi Guqin's emotions fluctuated, and he found it difficult to calm down. He looked at Su Jianshi's chest, and the blood in her heart dyed his clothes red. The Khanate sword embryo pierced Su Jianshi's heart. Logically speaking, no matter who it was, no matter how strong they were, if their heart was struck, they would die. But at this moment, Yi Guqin could see Su Jianshi's heart through the wound. Many golden rune chains were faintly discernible. In the depths of his heart, There was a semi-illusory golden sword flickering. But in the next moment, Yi Guqin looked over and saw that the golden sword shadow had disappeared again. However, Su Jianshir's situation was still quite bad. Her life force was fading away as if she was about to die. Why do you have to do this? Yi Guqin's voice was hard to calm down, and his eyes were bloodshot. This was the second time he had asked. The first time was in the Black Sky Mountain Range. Su Jianshir stood guard for him outside the Blood Demon lair. Even though she was heavily injured, she didn't leave. Because, I don't want to see you die. Because you're my vice leader. Su Jianshir's words were stammering. Su Jianshir stuttered. She looked at Yi Guqin and forced a smile. She raised her hand, wanting to touch Yi Guqin's face, but she was too weak to do so. Yi Guqin slowly tightened his grip on Su Jianshir's hand. Dung. Yi Guqin, promise me that if I really die, you'll send me back to Lotus Village, okay? I miss Dragon Abyss Village Chief, Uncle Ghost Axe, Sister Qiqiao, Uncle Lang, Auntie Fengjiao. Su Jianshir's voice became softer and softer. She was such an innocent girl. Even when her life was about to end, she still missed her family and friends. Okay, I promise you. Also, you won't die, Yi Guqin said in a low voice. Su Jianshir used her last bit of strength to tell Yi Guqin the location of Lotus Village. Then, her eyelids gradually closed. The complicated golden rune chains around her heart flickered, as if they were protecting Su Jianshir's last bit of life. Yi Guqin lowered his head as he hugged Su Jianshir, whose body was gradually turning cold with only a trace of life left. His black hair covered his eyes. The spectators were silent. Many were shocked by this scene. There were also many young girls whose eyes were red and tears of sadness flowed down their cheeks. How many people were willing to sacrifice their lives for their friends? The gray-robed man Hong Chen Shui, who was standing at the edge, was also trembling violently at this moment. His heart was filled with mixed feelings. She wanted to step forward, but the sword demon's nightmarish sword flashed in her mind. She couldn't move. Bang! In the sky, the golden sword aura was finally obliterated. However, Gu Xiaoyang also felt his blood churning. He calmed down and looked at Su Jianshir with a strange look in his eyes for the first time. Junior brother, are you okay? Song Yuyao asked with concern. I'm fine. That girl has a big secret. Interesting. That sword light can actually compete with the innate sword embryo. If I can obtain it. Gu Xiaoyang looked at the dying Su Jianshir with a trace of greed in his eyes. The wings of Zhen Qi behind his back flapped, and the innate sword embryo circled around him. Chaotic light filled the air. Yi Guqin, I didn't expect you to have such a confidant. Today not only will you die, but I will also obtain your confidant. Gu Xiaoyang said as he was about to attack again. He wanted to kill Yi Guqin in one fell swoop, and then take Su Jianshir's body. Rumble at this moment, the aura of heaven and earth changed. The blood-colored clouds in the sky churned. In an instant, the wind and clouds changed. The entire plain was swept by a sandstorm. Everyone felt a terrifying murderous aura that seemed to shake the heavens. Just feeling this murderous aura caused a cold sweat to break out on everyone's back. Many cultivators with weak hearts even fell to the ground, feeling a chill run down their spines. What is this? What a terrifying murderous aura. No. It's not just murderous aura. There's also sword intent. Some sword cultivators were shocked and exclaimed at the same time. Their gazes fell on the youth who was hugging the girl's body. Gu Xiaoyang and Song Yuyao also frowned as they looked at Yi Guqin. On the other side, Feng Manlu, who was blocked by Xian Tai and the others, also turned his head. This intent. Could it be? Yi Guqin lowered his head as his black hair covered his eyes. Traces of blood-red aura were emitted from Yi Guqin's body. It was a murderous aura that was like that of a blood-soaked Azura. He was already covered in wounds and exhausted. However, Yi Guqin couldn't let go of the sword in his hand. Yi Guqin gently placed Su Jianshir on the ground. Then he gripped the meteor soft sword tightly and looked up again. Those eyes were as red as blood. They were the eyes of an Azura. Gu Xiaoyang. Yi Guqin's voice was as cold as an eternal abyss as he poured out all of his true qi. With a loud boom, A surge of violent and boundless blood-red Shura sword intent swept out in all directions. This sword intent was so powerful that it almost turned into a domain. Vaguely, a very illusory blood-colored 18 layers of hell formed in the center of the Azura sword intent. Could this be a Sword Dao domain? Could Yi Guqin have turned the Azura sword intent into Sword Dao? The extremely illusory 18 levels of the blood prison were like a demonic mountain in the underworld, shocking everyone. Chapter 215. Blood-colored sword intent filled the air, as if it had turned into a sea of blood. Within the sea of blood, the illusory 18 layers of blood prison flickered. The 18 layers of blood prison seemed to have come from the underworld, bringing with it a terrifying aura that could shake the heavens. It was similar to Xia Yubing's Ice Sword Dao's Ice Domain. This was the Azura Blood Sea's Sword Dao domain, the 18 layers of Azura Blood Sea. This scene shocked everyone. It was as if they were looking at an unreal illusion. This brat. How could he possibly comprehend the sword principle? Song Yuyao, who was in the sky, cried out in shock. There was a huge gap between sword intent and sword Dao. It was even more difficult for a peerless sword intent to transform into sword Dao. Without extraordinary luck and comprehension, it was very difficult to comprehend. Even a prodigy like Gu Xiaoyang would need a long time to transform his stellar sword intent into stellar sword Dao, let alone Yi Guqin. However, the illusory 18 layers of blood prison was simply the embryonic form of a sword Dao domain. Although Yi Guqin's Azura sword intent has taken a big step forward, it hasn't reached the level of sword Dao. Otherwise, that domain wouldn't be so illusory. Gu Xiaoyang was surprised, but he remained calm. He had absolute confidence in suppressing Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's eyes were red as blood. His killing intent was unstoppable. Looking at the unconscious Su Jianshi, who only had a thread of life left, Yi Guqin's Azura intent erupted like a geyser. His comprehension of the Azura sword intent had taken a big step forward. Otherwise, the illusory sword Dao domain wouldn't have appeared. The 18 layers of Azura Blood Sea. Although it was only an illusory domain, its power far surpassed the power of sword intent. However, if possible, Yi Guqin didn't want to use this method to comprehend the Azura sword intent. When facing an enemy like Gu Xiaoyang, who was as unshakable as Mount Tai, drawing his sword might be an extremely stupid and ignorant action. However, there were many times when he knew he couldn't do it, but he still did it. This was because Yi Guqin was a sword master, a sword demon, and a sword demon. If he retreated at this moment and did not draw his sword, then his heart of the sword would crack, and it would become an even greater obstacle on his path of the sword Dao in the future. Again, Yi Guqin's body trembled violently. Even his qi and blood began to burn. This was not a description, but Yi Guqin was desperately squeezing out his own vitality in exchange for more power. Is the sword sect tired of living? He's actually burning his own qi and blood. If that's the case, his cultivation will be greatly damaged. There's no benefit to it. Seeing Yi Guqin do this, many martial artists turned pale with fright, because this was equivalent to draining the pond to catch all the fish. His talent would be squeezed dry, and he would not be able to improve in the future. Of course, they certainly didn't know that Yi Guqin had cultivated the 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra, and had reached perfection in every realm. Yi Guqin's talent could not be understood by ordinary people. However, in the eyes of the crowd, this was equivalent to suicide. He had cut off his own path of retreat. Humph, extremely stupid. Qin Baijian and the other 2 experts sneered, and the pressure in their hearts was greatly reduced. Xian'ing Lu Tianying, Morong Ditian Prince Yuanyi, and the others also sneered and unconsciously heaved a sigh of relief. Yi Guqin had given them too much pressure. Now that they saw Yi Guqin squeezing out his talent, they felt much more relieved. However, Chu Qingqi, Elder Qinghe, and the others' expressions changed slightly when they saw this scene, and their hearts sank. Let me see where your limit is. Feng Manlu, who was restrained by Xian Tai and the others, was not in a hurry. He just stood there calmly. Is this the struggle of an ant? Gu Xiaoyang shook his head when he saw that Yi Guqin seemed to be trying his best to accumulate power. He slowly raised his hand and still did not use his sword. As the starry sword essence spread out, a terrifying starry sword aura gathered above his arm. At the same time, there seemed to be an extremely illusory galaxy behind him, crossing the 9 heavens. It was the domain of the peerless starry sword principle, starry river illuminating the 9 heavens. Of course, this domain was also extremely illusory because Gu Xiaoyang had yet to transform his sword essence into sword principle. Starry river sword principle Starfall. Gu Xiaoyang performed the Starry Sword Pavilion's king-level sword principle. He pointed at Yi Guqin, and the dense sword qi surged and gathered. It was as if it had formed a star, and it fell down to kill Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin activated the Azura sword principle to the extreme, and at the same time, swung his sword horizontally. This sword was not the god-slaying sword principle. It was not the destruction of heaven and earth. It was 10,000 gods tribulation life fall. Yi Guqin's voice was extremely hoarse. As he swung his sword horizontally, the surrounding blood-colored sword essence turned into a sea of blood and surged violently. As this sword was swung, it seemed to reflect the mournful death of all living beings. Hundreds of millions of living beings were killed, and blood flowed like rivers. The tragic intent spread throughout the heavens and earth. The second style of 10,000 gods tribulation lifefall was an extremely murderous move. Once it was used, the heavens and earth would be shocked. Of course, this second style was not something that Yi Guqin could perform at his current level. At this moment, even the 1,000 feet long qi sea in his body could not support it anymore. The true qi in it was almost exhausted. At the same time, Yi Guqin's arm cracked, and the meteorite soft sword was trembling violently. It seemed that it could not withstand the vast murderous aura of the second style. Yi Guqin spat out another mouthful of blood. The condition of his body was extremely bad. This was an incomplete version of lifefall, but its power was still stronger than destruction of heaven and earth. Rumble. The extremely tragic sword was performed by Yi Guqin. It was as if the heavens and earth were crying and mourning together. This sword style. Tens of thousands of spectators, including those from the 7 major factions, were shocked by this sword style. The shock in their eyes lingered for a long time. The power of this sword style, shocking. Even Gu Xiaoyang's eyes were filled with astonishment. The Milky Way sword style, Starfall, collided with Yi Guqin's Lifefall. Terrifying sword qi waves swept out in all directions. It was as if the earth had been turned upside down. Endless yellow soil was overturned, and the earth was shattered. Yi Guqin's body was sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood and smashed heavily beside Su Jianshi. Gu Xiaoyang was also forced back more than 10 steps. At the same time, his hand was trembling slightly. A trace of blood flowed out from under his sleeve. Yi Guqin's move had injured him. This. Gu Xiaoyang seemed to be in disbelief. Junior brother Yu. Song Yuyao was also shocked. It doesn't matter. This kid is going to die anyway. Gu Xiaoyang flung his sleeve and looked at Yi Guqin again. Yi Guqin's true qi was depleted, and his vitality was low. It was difficult for him to continue fighting. It's time to end this, Yi Guqin. As for this girl, I'll take her back and study her. Gu Xiaoyang smiled contemptuously. Not far away, Feng Manlu had his hands behind his back. He was ready to attack. Even if Gu Xiaoyang had a terrifying background, Feng Manlu had nothing to fear. Is my path of sword Dao going to end here? Yi Guqin thought as he coughed up blood. He, the sword demon, had dominated the world for a long time. Was this the end? I don't believe it. Yi Guqin's eyes were still filled with unyielding fighting spirit. He didn't believe in heaven, earth, or fate. This was a sword cultivator. He entered the Dao with the sword and questioned his heart with the sword. Gu Xiaoyang revealed a sly smile. The innate sword embryo buzzed and vibrated. It pierced towards Yi Guqin again. This time no one will take the hit for you. Gu Xiaoyang chuckled. All of a sudden, an azure divine weapon came from afar, as fast as lightning. Clang! That gorgeous, crystal-like sword divine weapon collided with the innate sword embryo, and both of them were sent flying. Who is it? Gu Xiaoyang frowned and shouted coldly. Everyone was shocked. They didn't know who had interfered and stroked Gu Xiaoyang's whiskers. Young Master Xingyun of the Starry Sword Pavilion is so impressive." A burst of laughter came from afar. There was a hint of mockery in his voice. Many people were shocked and stunned. Who dared to offend the heaven's pride of the Starry Sword Pavilion? Chapter 216. Everyone was confused by this voice, and did not know what it meant. However, after Yi Guchen heard this, a thoughtful look appeared in his eyes. Could it be him? In the distant sky, a figure with a pair of zhenqi wings appeared. He was dressed in an elegant white robe. His face was like the autumn moon, his eyes were like dots of paint, his hair was like a knife, and his eyebrows were like ink paintings. His white sleeves fluttered in the wind, making him look like an immortal. He was elegant and extraordinarily handsome. The appearance of such a handsome young man was akin to the arrival of a celestial being. There was a strange aura and Tao rhythm that permeated the air, causing others to be affected. In particular, some of the women who were watching the battle revealed infatuation in their eyes. This was an almost instinctive attraction, and they were unable to resist the extraordinary charm of this handsome young man. "Oh, Mr. Xiaoyao, you're here?" Gu Xiaoyang looked at the young man, and was surprised. He didn't think that such a character would appear in a place like the Saint Origin Dynasty. This Jun has traveled far and wide, wandering the world. There is no place that I cannot go. Is it that surprising? That handsome young man was none other than young Master Xiaoyao, Jun Xiaoyao, who had some dealings with Yi Guchen. What? That young man is the young Master Xiaoyao who ranks first on the Heaven's Pride list? My goodness! I've long heard that young Master Xiaoyao is incomparably mysterious. Now that I've finally met you, you're truly like a celestial being. But Jun Xiaoyao is actually at the hidden latch of life and death. How can he be so strong? Yuan Mia, who is ranked second on the genius ranking, is only at the 9th refinement cycle. Maybe he's not from my dynasty. Many were impressed and shocked at the same time, as Jun Xiaoyao's powers were beyond many people's expectations. That's the mysterious genius Jun Xiaoyao, who ranks first on the genius roll. His strength is on par with the genius from the Starry Sword Pavilion. The people from the 7 forces were surprised as well. Gu Xiaoyang's eyes darkened a little when he saw Jun Xiaoyao coming and blocking his attack. In a place like Saint Origin Dynasty, with his status and background, he could look down on anyone. However, Jun Xiaoyao was the only one he didn't have the right to do so. Gu Xiaoyang, a seed of the Starry Sword Pavilion. After defeating young Master Sansheng, he became one of the 10 new young masters of the Nantian domain. Now that I've seen him today, I can see that he is indeed awe-inspiring and extraordinary, Jun Xiaoyao said with a faint smile. But everyone could hear the sarcasm in his words. Clearly, he was mocking Gu Xiaoyang for coming here and using his status and strength to suppress others. You flatter me. Brother Jun has been one of the top 10 young masters for a long time. I'm just a newcomer, Gu Xiaoyang said coldly. The South Horizon region's 10 great young masters was a title given to the 10 proud sons of heaven. Only peerless geniuses with extraordinary strength, background, means, and trump cards were qualified to receive the title of top 10 young masters. Gu Xiaoyang had become young master Nebula after defeating young master 3 lives. Jun Xiaoyao, on the other hand, had always been known as young master Xiaoyao, one of the top 10 young masters. There's no need to be so humble, brother Gu, Jun Xiaoyao smiled and said. I wonder why you're stopping me, brother Jun. Gu Xiaoyang did not want to get tangled up with Jun Xiaoyao, so he went straight to the point. This is Dugu. Oh no, brother Yi. Fate has brought us together. I wonder if you could spare us, brother Gu, Jun Xiaoyao said. Well, this young master Xiaoyao is helping Yi Guchen. Why? Many people were confused. However, only Yi Guchen himself knew that he and Jun Xiaoyao had only worked together once in the cavern, and Yi Guchen was the one who took advantage of the situation. Oh, and if I say no? Gu Xiaoyang's eyes turned cold after hearing Jun Xiaoyao's words, and his tone turned cold. While he was somewhat wary of Jun Xiaoyao, he was not afraid of him. I believe that you wouldn't want to fight me, brother Gu, because... Jun Xiaoyao was still smiling, and his smile was very gentle. You won't be able to bear the consequences. Jun Xiaorao flicked his sleeve, and the heavenly mandate sword buzzed like a dragon's roar. For a moment, the wind and clouds surged, and the sky shook. Many warriors were intimidated by the domineering aura that Jun Xiaoyao displayed in an instant. That was a force of nature, as if Jun Xiaoyao was the incarnation of a celestial being. His aura was like the convergence of nature. Jun Xiaoyao, you may be the seat of the Luo Fu Sword Pavilion and one of the top 10 young masters, but don't you dare get cocky in front of my junior brother. Song Yuyao shouted coldly and sharply. Shut up. Jun Xiaoyao looked impatient. He suddenly took a step forward, and his body blurred in an instant, dissipating like smoke. Oh no. That's the emperor-level movement art of the Luo Fu Sword Pavilion, the Wanderer. Back off, sister. Gu Xiaoyang raised his eyebrows. In the next moment, Jun Xiaoyao's body appeared in front of Song Yuyao as if he teleported. While they were both life and death challenge fighters, and Song Yuyao was one of the 7 great bears. However, there was still a huge gap between her and Jun Xiaoyao. After all, figures like the top 10 young masters were the cream of the crop, even among the geniuses. I've always been kind to women, and I don't hit women. However, in my eyes, you're not a woman. You're just a tigress. Jun Xiaoyao's lips curled into a faint smile. That faint smile was enough to captivate the hearts of thousands of girls, but in Song Yuyao's eyes, it was like the smile of a demon. Slap! A hard slap landed on Song Yuyao's face, sending her flying. Her beautiful cheeks were swollen, and several of her teeth flew out. Yuyao. Gu Xiaoyang flashed and caught Song Yuyao. That slap from Jun Xiaoyao was heavy, as he used spiritual qi. Half of Song Yuyao's face was bruised and swollen, making her look like a pig's head. Even her lips were swollen and purple. Brother, kill him. Kill that Jun Xiaoyao. Song Yuyao screamed, touching her swollen face. She was so angry that she almost fainted. To her, this was simply an unbearable humiliation. That scene left everyone speechless. Jun Xiaorao, Gu Xiaoyang's expression turned cold, and his innate sword embryo trembled. At the same time, a vertical slit appeared on his forehead between his eyebrows, as if it was about to open and leak divine light from the starry dome. Dual talents, huh? The smile on Jun Xiaoyao's face faded. He could easily crush Song Yuyao, but Gu Xiaoyang was definitely not easy to deal with. Gu Xiaoyang's eyes flashed, and his body flickered, heading straight for Yi Guqin. Jun Xiaoyao shook his head slightly and performed the emperor-level movement art of the Luo Fu Sword Pavilion, the Wanderer. Clang! The heavenly mandate sword clashed with Gu Xiaoyang's innate sword embryo again. Despite being a supreme-grade mystical weapon with mystical patterns, it was still shaken by the innate sword embryo. Seeing that his attack was blocked, Gu Xiaoyang's eyes turned cold, and the vertical slit between his eyebrows suddenly opened. That was his innate ability, the starry eyes. A cluster of starlight smashed into Yi Guqin's dantian like a bolt of lightning, sending him flying. Jun Xiaoyao's eyes turned cold. Gu Xiaoyang backed off and looked at Yi Guqin, coldly saying, "This is the spirit-devouring voodoo bug born from my starry eyes. After entering your dantian sea of qi, it will seal your sea of qi and devour your spiritual qi. Even if your sea of qi is hundreds of meters tall, it will still be devoured. After that, it will enter your brain and devour the power of your soul, until you are tortured to death. Yi Guqin, if I want you to die, you will die." What? Hearing Gu Xiaoyang's words, everyone turned pale with fright. That was tantamount to giving Yi Guqin a death sentence. Chapter 217. Yi Guqin looked at Gu Xiaoyang coldly and his eyes darkened. At that moment, he also felt that the starlight that had entered his dantian qi sea had turned into a finger-sized gu worm. The bug was as white as jade, as if it was carved from jade. Its surface was covered with star-like spots. As soon as it entered Yi Guqin's sea of qi, it secreted a thread that sealed his entire sea of qi. It then devoured the remaining golden spiritual qi in a frenzy. Yi Guqin tried to use his spiritual qi, but he found that he couldn't. Hey Yi Guqin, don't waste your time. Once the bug enters your sea of qi, there's no way to get rid of it. You'll become a piece of trash that can't use spiritual qi. In the end, your spiritual qi and soul will be sucked dry by the bug and tortured to death, Gu Xiaoyang said coldly. He looked at Yi Guqin as if he was looking at a dead man. The smile on Jun Xiaoyao's face gradually faded. Gu Xiaoyang looked at Jun Xiaorao and said coldly, Jun Xiaoyao, I'll remember what happened today. Your Luo Fu Sword Pavilion has always had conflicts with my Starry Sword Pavilion. It seems that we'll have to compete in the future. I'll fight you to the end. Jun Xiaoyao waved his sleeve. Gu Xiaoyang glanced at Jun Xiaoyao and Yi Guqin coldly, then looked at Su Jianshi, who was unconscious on the ground, and said, Yeah, let's leave. Although he wanted to find out Su Jianshi's secret, it was obvious that he couldn't do anything with Jun Xiaorao around. Junior brother, are we just going to let it go like this? Song Yuyao covered her bruised cheek with one hand and looked at Yi Guqin, Jun Xiaoyao, and the others with a venomous gaze. Yi Guqin is already a dead man. As for Jun Xiaoyao, I'll make him pay in the future, Gu Xiaoyang said. He took Song Yuyao and turned to enter the Gate of Stars. On the ground, Yi Guqin looked at the two who were about to leave. His blood-red eyes were filled with coldness, and his voice was as cold as ice. Gu Xiaoyang, Su Jianshi's sword strike, and the hatred of my sword embryo being stolen. This you will repay it with double in the future. Hearing Yi Guqin's words, Gu Xiaoyang did not care at all. You'd better take care of your funeral. Gu Xiaoyang didn't care. Gu Xiaoyang knew how terrifying the soul star-devouring venomous insect was. He believed that Yi Guqin could never survive. With a contemptuous smile, Gu Xiaoyang left in a carefree manner, as if he didn't care. Song Yuyao glared at Jun Xiaoyao and the others with a resentful look before leaving as well. Finally, the starry gate dissipated in the void and turned into specks of starlight. The great storm finally calmed down. Everyone present felt as if they were dreaming. Everything was so unreal. First, it was the world-shocking confrontation between Yi Guqin and Xia Yubing. Their trump cards were revealed one after another, shocking everyone. The starry gate appeared again, and Gu Xiaoyang and the others appeared, wanting to kill Yi Guqin. Then Jun Xiaoyao, the first on Sheng Yuan's Heaven's Pride roll, appeared and helped Yi Guqin block his death. Such twists and turns made everyone feel that their trip to watch the battle was not in vain. However, when they saw Yi Guqin, who was covered in wounds and exhausted, many people fell silent. They also heard Gu Xiaoyang's words. Yi Guqin was poisoned by the soul star-devouring venomous insect. Putting aside whether he would die in the end, at least everyone saw with their own eyes that Yi Guqin couldn't use his spiritual qi. For a martial artist, being unable to use spiritual qi was no different from being a cripple. Is the sword sect, which had just risen like a blazing sun, going to fall like this? Many people didn't want to believe it, and at the same time, felt that it was a pity. Alas, what a pity! The sword sect that fell once in the past is about to fall a second time. Truly lamentable, truly lamentable. Of course, there were some ear-piercing voices that carried a sense of ridicule and ridicule. After all, not everyone was willing to see Yi Guqin rise. At this moment, whether it was Qin Baijian and the other two experts, Lu Tianying, Xianing Morong Ditian, or Prince Yuani, they all breathed a sigh of relief. In their eyes, Yi Guqin was no different from a cripple. But was that really the case? Only Yi Guqin knew the real situation. Although he couldn't use spiritual qi for the time being, it should be known that he cultivated the 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra, which had reached perfection in every stage. Moreover, he had 1,000 feet qi si, which was far beyond Gu Xiaoyang's imagination. Most importantly, Yi Guqin had not even passed the 3rd spiritual tribulation in his sea of qi. If he really passed the 3rd minor tribulation and drew the strange lightning into his qi si, even the soul star-devouring venomous insect wouldn't be able to withstand the terrifying power of the strange lightning. This was where Gu Xiaoyang miscalculated. After all, even he didn't think that there would be someone in the world who would draw the terrifying power of strange fire and lightning into his qi si. It was no different from suicide. However, Yi Guqin did just that. As such, Yi Guqin just couldn't use spiritual qi for the time being. When he passed the 3rd minor tribulation, the soul star-devouring venomous insect would be easily dealt with. Yi Guchen even vaguely felt that the soul star-devouring venomous insect wouldn't harm him. Instead, it would bring him quite a pleasant surprise. Gu Xiaoyang, you miscalculated this time, Yi Guchen thought to himself. However, this was exactly what he wanted. After all, after defeating Xia Yubing, he had become too outstanding. Such brilliance could easily attract a lot of fear and harm. Now, everyone thought that Yi Guchen's spiritual qi was crippled, and he no longer had the talent for cultivation. This could keep him safe for the time being. Brother Yiyu? Jun Xiaoyao landed beside Yi Guchen and looked at Yi Guchen's dantian, frowning slightly. Yi Guchen cupped his fists and said to Jun Xiaoyao, "It's fine. Thank you so much, Brother Jun. I'll definitely repay your kindness in the future. I've always done as I please. Furthermore, the Luofu Sword Pavilion has some grudges with the Starry Sword Pavilion. I didn't do this just for you." Jun Xiaoyao waved his hand casually. He pondered for a moment and took out a jade bottle. There are 5 great jade spirit recovery pills in this jade bottle. They're sacred items for healing. You and that lady can take them. Thank you. Yi Guchen didn't hesitate and poured out a pill from the jade bottle. As the seed of the Luofu Sword Pavilion, the pills Jun Xiaoyao took out were naturally extraordinary. The pill was sparkling and translucent, like a piece of white jade. It carried a thick pill fragrance. Yi Guchen walked to Su Jianshir's side and let her take the pill. This lady's injuries are too severe. She's close to death. I'm afraid this pill can only temporarily stabilize her injuries. It'll be difficult to heal her. Jun Xiaoyao shook his head slightly. Yi Guchen also swallowed a great jade spirit recovery pill and cupped his fists at Jun Xiaoyao again. I'll find a way to heal her injuries. I'll never forget what you've done for me today. Haha, alright. Now that this matter is settled, I'll be leaving. By the way, Jun Xiaoyao seemed to have thought of something and took out a jade token and handed it to Yi Guchen. This is... Yi Guchen was puzzled. This is the Luofu token of the Luofu Sword Pavilion. If you leave the dynasty in the future and head to the Nantian region, you can head to the Luofu Sword Pavilion with this token. Perhaps we'll meet again someday, Jun Xiaoyao said. Thank you. Yi Guchen accepted the Luofu token. Everyone's expression changed when they saw this scene. Being able to establish a relationship with the Luofu Sword Pavilion was enough to make some people wary. Yi Guchen knew that Jun Xiaoyao was indirectly giving him a layer of protection, so that some people wouldn't dare to make a move against him. In the end, Jun Xiaoyao waved his sleeves and left with the wind like a white crane. Next, Yi Guchen's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at Qin Baijian and the other 2 powerhouses, as well as the 7 forces with different thoughts. Yi Guchen knew that the crisis wasn't over yet. Chapter 218. Putting aside the fact that Qin Baijian and the other 2 experts already had a grudge against him, just the 7 major forces were already scheming against each other. One of the main reasons for this was the Venerable One's cave abode. Whoever could get Yi Guchen would be able to get the Venerable One's cave abode. Among the 7 major forces, only the Blade Sealing King Palace wouldn't fight for Yi Guchen. It wasn't just because they were a saber cultivator force. It was also because Yi Guchen had killed Zhao Fengyang, a disciple on the Heavenly Saber list, and even chopped off one of Mo Juechen's arms. He already had a grudge against the Blade Sealing King Palace. However, as time passed bit by bit, a strange situation occurred. Not only did the Blade Sealing King Palace not fight for Yi Guchen, but the other 6 major forces also didn't try to rope in Yi Guchen. This made everyone feel suspicious. Sensing the treacherous atmosphere, the spectators present also seemed to feel the undercurrent surging. If there were no accidents, Yi Guchen, who was the #1 expert in the elite assembly, would naturally be sought after by all the major forces. However, the atmosphere was strangely quiet now. Many people came to a sudden realization and understood the reason why the major forces were hesitating. Firstly, Yi Guchen had a grudge against the Starry Sword Pavilion. However, this wasn't the most important reason. After all, he still had Jun Xiaoyao and the Luofu Sword Pavilion to support him. Secondly, in the eyes of outsiders, Yi Guchen was already a cripple who couldn't use his true qi. If Yi Guchen still had his talent and strength, the major forces wouldn't hesitate to fight for Yi Guchen. However, they had all heard Gu Xiaoyang's words. Yi Guchen had been poisoned by the spirit-devouring star worm. Not only could he no longer use his true qi, but his soul power would also be devoured, and he would eventually die. There was no value in nurturing a genius who could die at any time. Moreover, many of the higher-ups saw that Yi Guchen had burned his blood and qi to squeeze out his potential. It could be said that he had destroyed his own future, and his future cultivation would be very difficult. Naturally, they didn't know Yi Guchen's secret trump card, which was why they had such thoughts. Yi Guchen instantly understood when he saw the 7 major forces remain silent. It turned out that in the eyes of outsiders, he had already become a piece of trash, just like how his sword vein was crippled and his sword embryo was seized. Sigh, what a pity. The sword sect of a generation has fallen to such a state that no one cares about it. Prince Yuani finally heaved a sigh of relief. Previously in the plains, he had been afraid that Yi Guchen would seek revenge. Therefore, he had gathered a group of elites to kill Yi Guchen. Now Yi Guchen was no longer a threat to him. Prince Yuani smiled gloatingly. There was also Morong Ditian. The stone in his heart had also been removed. He looked coldly at Yi Guchen and thought to himself, I'm already a disciple of the limitless sword sect, but you've become a piece of trash. The gap between us will only grow bigger. As for Qin Baijian and the other 2 experts, although Yi Guchen was already a piece of trash and his death was not far away, they still wanted to personally kill Yi Guchen to prevent future troubles. In addition, Song Daozhen, Chu Shiqing, Princess Yuanyang, Xia Shishir, and the others were all looking at Yi Guchen with worried expressions. He'd finally managed to wash away the injustice he'd suffered and killed Xia Yubing with great difficulty. Could it be that he was going to die once more? Looking at everyone's worried, pitiful, and mocking gazes, Yi Guchen's expression was very calm. If I pass the 3rd minor tribulation and cultivate a 10,000 feet chi ocean, I wonder how the expressions of these people who are mocking me will be? Yi Guchen couldn't help but think. But now he needed to join a force to temporarily block the threat of Qin Baijian and the other 2. Finally, as time passed, the upper echelons of the 7 forces began to speak. Yi Guchen, join our limitless sword sect and we'll let you become a disciple of the Sun Moon Hall. Your treatment will be the same as Xian Hao's, and you'll be able to receive guidance from me and sect master Xian Wuji. In the air, the limitless sword sect's Xian Tai stood up and spoke. At the same time, he also emitted a powerful aura that shook people's minds. Yi Guchen, our 3 imperial palaces also has sword cultivators. Join our 3 imperial palaces and you'll receive the best treatment. Our 9 profound sect is one of the 3 sects and has an extraordinary background. Yi Guchen, you won't regret joining our 9 profound sect. Our consonance divine palace is also. This all the onlookers were stunned. Isn't Yi Guchen already a piece of trash? Why are the 7 forces still fighting over him? Someone was puzzled. Are you stupid? The 7 forces aren't fighting over Yi Guchen because he's a piece of trash. They're fighting over the Honorable Realm's cave dwelling behind him. Some of the smarter ones suddenly came up with an idea. I see. At this moment, everyone understood. The value of a Honorable Realm's cave dwelling was immeasurable. Even the 7 forces coveted it. Although they said that they wanted to rope in Yi Guchen with generous conditions, they actually wanted to obtain the Honorable Realm's cave dwelling. Yi Guchen was already a piece of trash. Even if he obtained the resources, it would be difficult for him to improve in the future. Among the 7 forces, other than the Sword Sect's Tower Forest and the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace, the other 5 forces had all opened their mouths to rope in Yi Guchen. Looking at the upper echelons of the 7 forces, Yi Guchen's expression was calm, but he was sneering in his heart. How could he not know what these forces were planning? However, no matter what, he had to join one of the forces. As a sword cultivator, the most suitable forces for him to join were the Limitless Sword Sect and the Sword Sect's Tower Forest. However, Yi Guchen didn't have a good impression of the Limitless Sword Sect. He had noticed the scene of Xian Tai and the others obstructing Feng Manlu. Not only that, Yi Guqin had already formed a grudge with Xianing from the Sky Moon Hall and Lu Tianying. Not to mention, Murong Ditian was the chosen disciple of the Limitless Sword Sect. If Yi Guqin joined the Limitless Sword Sect, there would be endless trouble. Yi Guqin turned to look at the Sword Sect's tower forest and looked at Feng Manlu, who had been wearing an indifferent expression. What exactly is the intent hidden in his body? Yi Guqin faintly felt that Feng Manlu was hiding a secret. It wasn't just the brilliant sword heart. Yi Guqin joined my Limitless Sword Sect. Xiantai stepped forward and spoke again with an impatient expression. His tone also carried a trace of dominance. Xiantai definitely wouldn't let go of a venerable realm's cave. Yi Guqin frowned with a cold expression. He wasn't afraid of threats at all. At this moment, Feng Manlu, who hadn't said anything, finally stood up slowly. He had a handsome face and his blind eyes were empty. He wore a plain cloth robe and didn't emit any fierce aura. However, the moment he stepped out, the noisy world quieted down. Xiantai's eyes darkened slightly. Although Feng Manlu had fallen to the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge stage, he was still the Limitless Sword Monarch, a divine palace monarch. When he stepped out, everyone held their breaths. Yi Guqin, are you interested in joining my Sword Sect's tower forest? Feng Manlu asked. He didn't force or rope Yi Guqin in. He was just asking with a faint smile. Yi Guqin turned solemn. Feng Manlu, are you trying to gain something without risking anything? Can your Sword Sect's tower forest give out the benefits that my Limitless Sword Sect promised? Xiantai said coldly. I can't. Feng Manlu nodded. So what qualifications do you have to compete with my Limitless Sword Sect for talent? Xiantai didn't give him any leeway. Feng Manlu smiled and shook his head. I can't give Yi Guqin anything. However, the sovereign cave dwelling belongs to him. Everyone was shocked by Feng Manlu's words. Chapter 219. As everyone knew, the cave dwellings in the heavenly wasteland plains were extremely valuable. After every elite gathering, the cave dwellings obtained by the Heaven Prides would eventually be taken back by their respective sections. The sects would also compensate them accordingly. Although it was called compensation, it was in fact just a formality. Even ordinary cave dwellings were like this, let alone the cave dwelling of a heavenly palace venerable. However, the cave dwelling that all forces coveted was given away by Feng Manlu, who agreed to give it to Yi Guqin alone. It was no wonder that everyone was so surprised. Feng Manlu, you must have lost your mind. That's a venerable cave dwelling. Can you represent the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest? Xiantai's face was shrouded in a layer of haze. Even he didn't expect Feng Manlu to do such a thing. Since I've spoken, I'll keep my word. Feng Manlu didn't argue too much. However, everyone could feel Feng Manlu's courage. That was a venerable expert's cave dwelling, a blessing that even divine dwelling experts wanted to seize. Yet, Feng Manlu had given it to Yi Guqin in such a casual tone. If it was any other force, it would be impossible for them to do so. Xiantai ignored Feng Manlu and turned to look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin, make your choice. Xiantai was already impatient. Yi Guqin didn't hesitate too much and said, I choose the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. As soon as these words came out, the surroundings fell silent. However, this was within the expectations of many people. They thought that if they could occupy a venerable cave dwelling alone, they would also do such a good thing. However, when Xiantai heard these words, his originally cold face became even more frozen. His tiger eyes, like the sun and moon in the sky, coldly stared at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin, I'll give you another chance to choose. Which side do you want to join? The Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, Yi Guqin calmly said. Good boy. Xiantai stepped out into the void, and an incomparably powerful aura gushed towards Yi Guqin. This pressure was far more terrifying than that of Qin Baijian and the other two Heaven and Earth Spiritual Bridge experts. This was because Xiantai had reached the peak of the Spirit Bridge stage and was half a step into the Divine Dwelling stage. However, at this moment, Feng Manlu also took a step forward. Xiantai's oppressive aura immediately disappeared. Since Yi Guqin has already joined my sword sect Pagoda Forest, he's a disciple of my sword sect Pagoda Forest. Isn't your oppression of him going too far? Feng Manlu had a gentle personality and was rarely angered. At this moment he spoke calmly. Yi Guqin, you should know that you are no different from a cripple right now. Not only that, there are many people who want to kill you. If you join my limitless sword sect, you can still keep your life. If you don't. Xiantai looked coldly at Yi Guqin and threatened him. I'm sorry, but I've already made up my mind. Yi Guqin's tone also turned cold. Good, very good. Xiantai didn't say anything. He turned to Qin Baijian and the other two. Without saying anything, Qin Baijian and the other two understood tacitly. During the elite gathering, due to the rules of the 7 great forces, they naturally didn't dare to attack Yi Guqin. But now that the elite gathering had ended and they had received Xiantai's hint, they naturally wouldn't stop. Qin Baijian, Mo Yunzi, and the Spring Cloud Pavilion Master stepped forward at the same time, their auras erupting. A terrifying killing intent and aura enveloped the area like a black cloud. Could it be that Qin Baijian and the others are going to attack? I wonder if the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest can protect him? It's hard to say. If Feng Manlu was still a Divine Dwelling stage expert, then he could, but he's only at the Spirit Bridge stage now. Including Xiantai, there are 4 true Spirit Bridge stage experts. Feeling the tense atmosphere, many martial artists whispered to each other. Yi Guqin frowned. He wasn't afraid. Because he had taken a gamble and placed his bet on the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest and Feng Manlu. He felt that Feng Manlu had something that could surprise him. Humph, kid, now that the elite gathering has ended, you're even more untactful and wasted Lord Xiantai's good intentions. Today, I'll make you pay with your life for the 2 princes of the Qin clan. Qin Baijian's tone was cold, his true qi surging like the wrath of a thunder god. A Spirit Bridge stage expert had forged a Spirit Bridge in his body. Every move of his could trigger the power of heaven and earth. Its power was mysterious and unfathomable. Little bastard, pay with your life for my grandson. Mo Yunzi's old face was also extremely cold. His gaze was as if he wanted to skin Yi Guqin alive. And my Spring Cloud Pavilion's Ji Hongmei. Kid, pay with your life. The Spring Cloud Pavilion Master's charming face was covered in frost. She was about to attack. The 3 Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge experts unleashed their killing intent at the same time. How terrifying was that? The tens of thousands of spectators couldn't help but retreat like the tide, afraid of being affected. A Spirit Bridge stage expert's attack wasn't like a Qi refinement stage expert's, whose every move could shatter heaven and earth. Yi Guqin's face was expressionless as he felt the 3 strong killing intents lock onto him. He looked at Feng Manlu. Chu Qingqi and Elder Qing he also cast their gazes toward Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu didn't release any of the aura of a Spirit Bridge stage expert. The corners of his white robe fluttered in the wind. There was still a faint smile on his lips. The 3 of you, please give me some face, Feng Manlu said in a gentle tone. He didn't have the powerful aura of a Sword King expert. Qin Baijian and the other 2 looked at Feng Manlu with narrowed eyes. Although Feng Manlu had fallen to the Spirit Bridge stage after that incident, he was still the former Lightless Sword King, a legend of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas. Anyone would be wary of him. Humph, he's just a cripple with a broken divine dwelling. What's there to be afraid of? Xiantai snorted. With Xiantai's support, Qin Baijian and the other 2 were emboldened. I'm sorry, Wind Sword King. Today, Yi Guqin must die. Qin Baijian said. The 3 of you, can you step back? Feng Manlu's eyes were empty, but he still had a faint smile on his face. Feng Manlu, I've tolerated you because you're the former Sword King. Don't be so tactless. You're only at the same level as us now. Mo Yunzi was furious. He couldn't wait to kill Yi Guqin. When he saw Feng Manlu trying to stop him, he scolded coldly. You can't do the same thing more than 3 times. Feng Manlu sighed. Everyone attack. Don't delay any longer. Qin Baijian shouted and took out his mystical rune divine weapon. Mo Yunzi also attacked. His true qi gathered and formed a giant hand that blotted out the sky. Spring Cloud Pavilion Master waved her hand, and a 7-colored true chi tore through the void like a waterfall. The 3 experts attacked at the same time, and attacked Yi Guqin. At that moment, Feng Manlu moved and appeared in front of Yi Guqin. His back was thin and ordinary. However, when he stood in front of Yi Guqin, it was as if he could hold up the sky with one hand. You want to kill Yi Guqin? I won't allow it. Feng Manlu didn't use his sword. Instead, he used his fingers as a sword. When he pointed, the sword would be drawn. When the sword was drawn, the person would be drawn. This is one with the sword. Yi Guqin turned pale and was shocked. Chapter 220. As the Sword Demon, Yi Guqin had a deep understanding of the way of the sword. Some grandmasters who had been immersed in the way of the sword for many years could comprehend the enlightened sword heart. Once one reached the enlightened sword heart realm, one's understanding of the way of the sword would improve by leaps and bounds. However, the main benefit of the enlightened sword heart was in terms of comprehension. The realm above the enlightened sword heart was the unity of man and sword. At this realm, the man was the sword, and the sword was the man. When the sword was there, the man was there, and when the man was there, the heart was there. Every movement was filled with boundless sword force. In the blink of an eye, the sword chi could tear the sky apart and shake the 9 heavens. At this realm, even if one did not have a sword in his hand, he could still emit sword chi. If he had a sword, the power would be shocking. Just like Feng Manlu, who had a thin back view. However, at this moment, in Yi Guqin's eyes, he was like a sword that pierced through the sky. The sword chi spread in all directions and stirred up endless clouds and winds. Facing the ultimate moves of Qin Baijian and the other 2 experts, Feng Manlu moved his body and pointed his sword. With just a casual point, the sword chi pierced through the sky and destroyed all of them. In the next moment, Feng Manlu moved his feet and arrived in front of the 3 experts in an instant. Oh no! Qin Baijian and the others' faces changed. They did not expect Feng Manlu, who was also a heaven and earth spiritual bridge expert, to be so powerful. That's all I have to say. Since you guys are still so forceful, I can only take 1 arm each as a punishment, Feng Manlu said casually. Feng Manlu, don't talk big. Mo Yunzi took out a huge black seal. In an instant, black chi filled the sky and expanded in the wind. It was as if it had turned into a black mountain and suppressed Feng Manlu. Qin Baijian's thunder true chi surged, and a pair of violent thunder wings appeared on his back. It was the Qin family's Thunder Wings secret skill. The pavilion master of the Spring Cloud Pavilion waved her jade-like hands and released endless spider silk-like ribbons that wrapped around Feng Manlu in an attempt to bind him. Facing the powerful moves of the 3 great powerhouses, everyone present was extremely shocked. A heaven and earth spiritual bridge expert was already unattainable in the eyes of the crowd, let alone 3 experts attacking at the same time. If it were any other spiritual bridge of heaven and earth expert, they would not be able to withstand the attacks of 3 experts of the same level at the same time. Feng Manlu, how are you going to resist? Xiantai coldly observed. Facing the ultimate moves of the 3 experts, Feng Manlu remained calm. Although he was blind and couldn't see, he could sense with his soul power. In the next moment, Feng Manlu took a step forward and pointed with his finger. Break. Sword chi spread out in all directions in the void as if it was boiling. Feng Manlu's sword finger technique tore apart all of the moves and destroyed the void. His figure blurred as he arrived in front of Qin Baijian. Using his finger as a sword, he slashed down. Ah! Qin Baijian's figure retreated rapidly, and at the same time, he let out a miserable howl. His left arm was removed and tossed into the void. Blood splashed out wantonly. The second one. Feng Manlu did not stop and turned to Mo Yunzi again. Impossible. Mo Yunzi's face was filled with shock as he watched Qin Baijian lose an arm so easily. His face was also filled with shock. He took out the pitch-black seal and tried to suppress Feng Manlu. In the next moment, Feng Manlu appeared in front of him and pointed with his finger again. Puff. Mo Yunzi spat out a mouthful of blood and lost an arm. No. Lord Xiantai, save me. Spring Cloud Pavilion Master's face changed drastically. He turned around and rushed toward Xiantai. Feng Manlu, you have comprehended the union of man and sword. Xiantai's face also changed slightly. The union of man and sword was a realm that all sword cultivators dreamed of. However, there were only a few who could reach this realm. I have to thank Xian Wuji. If he hadn't destroyed my spiritual dwelling, I wouldn't have been able to cultivate in seclusion in the Sword Sect Pagoda for 10 years and finally comprehend the union of man and sword. Feng Manlu waved his hand and pointed at Spring Cloud Pavilion Master again. How dare you be so presumptuous in front of me? Xiantai rebuked angrily. Although Feng Manlu had comprehended the union of man and sword, he was still an expert with half a foot in the spiritual dwelling realm. Sword chi gushed out from Xiantai's fingertip. Yin and Yang chi burst out and turned into a black and white sword ray. Limitless sword art? Feng Manlu shook his head indifferently. It was still one finger. The limitless sword art was broken. Ah! Spring Cloud Pavilion Master let out a shrill scream. One of her slender arms had been severed from the shoulder by Feng Manlu, and blood flowed everywhere. In just a few breaths' time, Feng Manlu had defeated the 3 heaven and earth spiritual bridge cultivators and cut off one of their arms. How powerful was this? Endless uproar surged like a tide, spreading in all directions. This result was out of everyone's expectations. Even some life and death chamber experts widened their eyes, as if they had seen something inconceivable. Feng Manlu, an expert whose spiritual dwelling had been destroyed and had fallen to the spiritual bridge stage, still had such battle strength. It was shocking. More importantly, Xiantai had also tried to stop Feng Manlu, but his attack was easily broken by Feng Manlu. Could it be that Feng Manlu hasn't fallen, and is still at the divine dwelling stage? Otherwise, how could he so easily crush spiritual bridge experts? Some people even wondered if Feng Manlu was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. However, Yi Guqin, who had been watching the battle, knew in his heart. It wasn't because of his cultivation level, but because Feng Manlu, who had comprehended the unity of man and sword, had a terrifying strength that could crush those of the same level. If it were Yi Guqin, he could also defeat all the warriors in the Qi refining realm if he comprehended the union of man and sword. He didn't even need to use so many trump cards to deal with Xia Yubing. He could directly kill her. This was the terror of the unity of man and sword. Yi Guqin's eyes shone brighter. He had a feeling that Feng Manlu would give him a big surprise. The unity of man and sword was indeed a rare state. If he could receive guidance from Feng Manlu, Yi Guqin's sword cultivation level would improve rapidly. In the air, the 3 experts who had lost an arm each huddled together, covering the wounds on their shoulders. Their eyes were filled with extreme fear and shock as they stared at Feng Manlu. They knew that although Feng Manlu was an expert of the same level as them, but if Feng Manlu wanted to take their lives, it would be easy. This was the legend of the sword world, the lightless sword king, Feng Manlu. Among the tens of thousands of experts, many sword cultivators looked at the handsome man in plain clothes with shock and respect. He stood in the air with his hands behind his back. Feng Manlu didn't make a move, but once he made a move, it was shocking. This is the peerless sword king who once swept the world with his sword. He went into seclusion in the sword school pagoda for 10 years. When he came out again, he was still invincible. Many sword cultivators went crazy. They were so excited that their blood was boiling as they looked at Feng Manlu with fanatical eyes. It could be said that there were only 2 people that these sword cultivators admired and respected in this elite gathering. The sword school Yi Guqin, the sword king Feng Manlu. And these 2 people were now members of the sword school pagoda forest. Many sword cultivators who participated in the competition even thought of joining the sword school pagoda forest. High in the sky, Xiantai's face was extremely cold. Feng Manlu's strength had greatly exceeded his expectations. He knew that he couldn't suppress Feng Manlu today, and he couldn't force Yi Guqin to join the limitless sword school. He looked at Yi Guqin and said coldly, Yi Guqin, since you made the wrong choice, you should be prepared to pay the price. The disciples of the Sun Moon Hall will teach you well. There is no medicine for regret in this world. Xiantai had made up his mind to eliminate Yi Guqin. Perhaps he wouldn't make a move because of his status, but the disciples of the Sun Moon Hall could. Not to mention Xianhao, any one of them could kill Yi Guqin, who was like a cripple. Once Yi Guqin died, Xiantai would have an excuse to seize the Honorable Realm's cave dwelling. Limitless Sword School, Sun Moon Hall, I will accompany you to the end. Yi Guqin was fearless. Chapter 221. As Feng Manlu displayed his shocking strength, the commotion gradually died down. However, many cultivators were still unable to calm down. Feng Manlu, who was standing in the air, had his hands behind his back. He still did not reveal any aura. He opened his mouth and said, Yi Guqin will be a disciple of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas in the future. If any expert of the older generation dares to attack him, don't blame me for being merciless. Feng Manlu's voice was not loud, but it resounded in the ears of every cultivator on the plain. It was obvious that the Sword King had spoken. Unless it was an expert of the same generation as Yi Guqin, no one could attack him. If they did, they would have to bear the wrath of Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu had a gentle temperament and did not kill easily. However, if anyone dared to provoke the former Sword King, the result would not be good. With the protection of the Sword King, Yi Guqin's life will not be in danger. His life will not be in danger? He was poisoned by Gu Xiaoyang's Soul Star Spirit-devouring worm. He will not live for long. Even if he survives, he will be a cripple without true qi. What future does he have? Many people looked at Yi Guqin and discussed softly. However, no matter what, this elite gathering had ended. In addition to Yi Guqin, there were many other Heaven's favorites who made everyone's eyes light up. These geniuses would join different sects and have bright futures in the future. Only Yi Guqin, who was ranked first in the elite gathering and had dual sword intents, was looked down upon by others. They felt that it would be difficult for him to improve. Not only that, it was also uncertain whether he could survive. Yi Guqin, I originally hated you to the core. However, I, Murong Ditian, do not need to be angry with a cripple. Murong Ditian walked over and looked at Yi Guqin. His eyes were filled with arrogance and disdain. I will join the Limitless Sword Sect and the Sun Moon Hall in the future. As for you, you will fall. Murong Ditian smiled. He looked at Yi Guqin and turned to leave. Crown Prince Yueni, Shinta Miao, and other geniuses who had grudges with Murong Ditian all looked at Yi Guqin with cold smiles. They didn't say much, but there was a kind of invisible mockery. Yi Guqin did not care about what the outside world thought of him. He just needed to know that he was not a cripple. Not only was he not a cripple, but when he passed the Qi-Si spiritual tribulation in the future, his brilliance would once again shock the entire Saint Origin dynasty. Feng Manlu landed beside Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin cupped his fists at Feng Manlu and said, Thank you for your help, Senior Feng. It's fine. This token is for you. Feng Manlu casually tossed a token to Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin took the token. The token was purple gold in color, and had the word 5 engraved on it. This, Chu Qingqi and Elder Qinghe, who were approaching from the side, were both astonished when they saw the purple gold token engraved with the word 5. 5th place in the inner yard? Chu Qingqi suppressed the shock in his heart. As one of the 7 major powers of the Saint Origin dynasty, Sword Sect Talon had a large number of disciples. There were tens of thousands of odd-job disciples, and most of them were below the Qi refining realm. There were 5,000 outer yard disciples, and all of them were above the Qi refining realm. Some of them were even close to the Divine Soul realm. As for the inner yard, which was the core, there were only 100 of them. In other words, there were only 100 inner yard disciples in Sword Sect Talon. Moreover, the inner yard disciples were the elites of the elites. Even Chu Qingqi, who was at the half-step Divine Soul realm, was only ranked 82nd in the inner yard. Every inner court disciple was given a command medallion, on which was engraved their ranking among the 100 inner court disciples. In the inner yard, those who ranked below 50 would receive a bronze token. Those ranked between 30 and 50 would receive a silver token. Those ranked between 20 and 30 would receive a gold token. Those ranked between 1 and 10 would receive a purple gold token. The token that Feng Manlu gave Yi Guchen was purple gold token number 5. In other words, this token represented Yi Guchen's identity as the 5th place in the inner yard. The 5th place in the inner yard did not only represent an identity, but also a lot of cultivation resources and authority. Elder Qing, he was also a little stunned. The top 10 disciples of the inner yard were all at the Divine Soul Realm and above. Moreover, they were all at the 4th transformation of the Divine Soul Realm. However, Yi Guchen was only at the 9th transformation of the Qi Refining Realm. The difference was too great. If this matter spread to the inner yard, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. Yi Guchen would be pushed to the heart of the storm. Do you dare to accept it? Feng Manlu asked indifferently. Yi Guchen looked at Chu Qingqi and Elder Qing, he's changing expressions. He knew that this token was not simple. Not everyone was worthy of it. However, he also knew that this was Feng Manlu's test for him. Yi Guchen accepted the token without hesitation. Feng Manlu nodded slightly. Yi Guchen hesitated for a moment and said, I can't go to the sword sect Talon yet. I have other matters to attend to. Yi Guchen was naturally talking about Su Jianshi. He wanted to send Su Jianshi back to Lotus Village. Feng Manlu seemed to be aware of this as well. He nodded slightly, placed his hand by his lips, and whistled. In the next moment, an eagle's cry came from the distance. A giant green eagle spread its wings and flew over. It flapped its wings and landed in front of everyone. Yi Guchen was surprised when he sensed the powerful demonic qi from the azure eagle. A rank 4 demonic beast? This is a rank 4 demonic beast, the green sky eagle. It's perfect as a means of transportation. After you're done here, return to the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest. I still have something to discuss with you. As for this venerable's cave, you don't have to worry about it with me around. Feng Manlu said indifferently. Yes. Yi Guchen nodded slowly. He carried the unconscious Su Jianshi onto the back of the azure sky eagle. Not far away, Xue also jogged over. Her cheeks were stained with tears. Whether it was the unconscious Su Jianshi or the heavily injured Yi Guchen, Xue's heart ached. Her eyes were red. Don't cry, Xue. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. Big brother, big sister Su. Xue sobbed as tears the size of soybeans rolled down from the corner of her eyes. Don't worry, she won't die. I won't let her die. Yi Guchen's tone was resolute. Su Jianshi had done too much for him. If he couldn't save Su Jianshi, how could he face his own sword heart? Yi Guchen carried the unconscious Su Jianshi and Xue onto the azure eagle. The azure eagle flapped its wings and soared into the sky, stirring up a gust of wind. He didn't want to think about anything else. He just wanted to send Su Jianshi back to Lotus Village. Everyone had different thoughts as they watched Yi Guchen's group leave on the azure eagle. However, with Feng Manlu's influence, those who wanted to harm Yi Guchen didn't dare to do anything. Only Qin Baijian and the other 2 powerful cultivators stared at Yi Guchen's departing figure. They exchanged glances with one another, their eyes filled with bone-chilling coldness. Yi Guchen, even if you're at the end of the world, you'll still die. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.